reaction. Now, in terms of how it started, everyone that I've heard who actually is taking the stance that, there was a barricade, people were barricaded in, I've yet to see one footage or one video or anything of somebody actually saying, here we are, we were in the mosque and here we are, they're the people barricading the door. Everyone's got mobile phones. There's nothing showing a barricade. It was prayer time. People were praying in there. And you know what? Electricity was shut off from outside. And the beatings, I endorse what Reem said here, the beatings and the way those people were brutally, violently assaulted, arrested, but I'm talking about they didn't even it was all true. It wasn't women and children who were barricaded. So I think we're careful. The single Ramadan that every single year there's a barricade, and therefore the Palestinians. So then I would beg the question, why, given that it's the biggest military force in the world, why don't you have fired? You've got the detection systems, the rockets don't do any injury, but then the bombardment of Gaza, people dying, and this happens every single Ramadan. So I just don't think it's simple as let's remember why this started and now Israel's decided that things have calmed down so they will restrain. It isn't. Netanyahu's political career is hanging in the balance. His defense minister's still there, even though he defiantly fired him at the end of March. So there's real turmoil on the home front for Israel and Netanyahu at the moment.
If I could just briefly jump in. So I disagree with most of what you said in terms of the security situation in Israel. Yes, there are political disagreements, but that happens in every country. So I think that anyone who understands the security apparatus of the state of Israel, specifically and especially the state of Israel, when there is a situation, anything to do with security, all the political problems, they get put aside. So I don't think there's as much turmoil in terms of the defense establishment as one would think. You can remember back when Naftali Bennett was, basically campaigning and railing against Netanyahu before he formed the coalition. Right when there was, it was a year and a half ago now. He put his political ideologies and ambitions aside and supported Netanyahu as the prime minister. So I don't think it's fair to say, oh, this is all turmoil. It's not. It really isn't. I can understand how optically it might be perceived as that, but it's not. Now, in terms of what you said about, well, this is a distraction from the protests, I would take issue with that. Again, yes, the protests were large and they have a right to protest, but the reforms are still going to happen. So I don't necessarily think that this is a distraction for anything. And you're right. My final point is this. You're right. There absolutely is, always heightened tensions around the holidays, but let's just not be completely one-sided, right? You can go back, and I remember, because I was within close proximity, in 2002 to Netanya, when people sat down for their Seder dinner and there was a suicide bombing. So it's not simply one-sided. And I can condemn disturbing, people's worship and provocative actions 100%. Also, like you, to condemn, the fact that two innocent people who are not a part of the security apparatus or defense establishment in Israel, they were killed today too. So let's just be even-handed with everything. And yeah, but Elisa, I love talking to you, by the way. It's great.
So Benjamin, sorry, I just want to jump in there. When I started speaking, I'm not sure if you were on the mic, but that is the first thing that I said. Two innocent people died today.
Yep, wonderful.
And I hadn't even checked, who they were, what background they were, whether they were Palestinian, I just condemned that, because nobody should be losing their life in this. I do say, though, so you say that, the protests are completely isolated and Netanyahu's in a strong position, and you gave an example, but it's not equivocal. And I'll tell you why it's not comparable, because Netanyahu fired his defense minister. He fired him, and now he is still there and critical to this political situation that's playing out with Gaza and Lebanon. In no world can that work. I know in the UK, when people have been fired, if they had to stay in their job, it's not going to be peace and harmony with the leader that fired them so publicly, literally 2 weeks ago. You're telling me that they've just put their tensions aside for this? I don't buy it. I don't know. That's just like, that's rose-tinted spectacles, Benjamin, and that's just
so.
How many
years did you serve in the Israeli army, if I may ask?
I'm not Israeli, so obviously 0, and you know that.
Okay. Well, I don't know that. You might be Israeli Arab. I don't know. I don't know what your background is. However, I would counter that with saying, for anyone who did serve in the military, we can assure you that political differences aside, that has no bearing. When the security of Israel is threatened in any way, people do put their political differences aside and their ideological differences aside, and that is not unique to the state of Israel. It's always been that way. So I would take issue with that, but that's just my opinion, which is grounded in facts. And we've seen that, right? You can look back to the former defense ministers, Benjamin Ben Eliezer. He had differences. Shaul Mofaz had differences.
Were they fired 2 weeks before an incident like this? And they had to... No, they weren't.
That's irrelevant. That's irrelevant. That is absolutely irrelevant.
That is the point I'm making, that he was fired publicly. There were global headlines about the fact that Netanyahu didn't think he was up to his job, and now he is still there. So any example you give me, wait, Benjamin, any example you give me, and don't just stick to Israel, let's use globally. Give me an example where a minister was fired, and you know what? This just shows how much power Netanyahu has. He fired a guy, and yet the guy is still there. So that's the question. How much power does Netanyahu really have?
Listen, but in terms, so Yoav Gallant, right? That is a career officer. Above all political divides and personal opinions, his first duty and his first loyalty is to the defense of the state of Israel. So if the defense of the state of Israel, if there's a security issue, it's ridiculous to say, well, this is all politics and he's still there, blah blah. He's still there because he's a career soldier, and he's going to put the security of Israel ahead of any type of partisan political divide between him and Netanyahu.
But when he was fired, Benjamin, nobody had hindsight that, in 2 or 3 weeks' time, there was going to be a security issue. So my question is, at the time he was fired, why didn't he leave? Why is he still there today? It the last couple fired. So that's my point, that it shows that how much power Netanyahu actually has. His career is hanging in the balance. He has great turmoil, political turmoil, and this ceasefire, from his perspective, from Israel's perspective, is nothing but, it's not out of the goodness of their heart. It's because politically he has to focus on other things.
Right, I just want to go to Hanani because you've had your hand up for a while and you can give a different perspective, and then I want to go to Sina Dusi.
Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. I have to say, in response to all of this amazing conversation, is that first of all, it is Israel's responsibility to ensure freedom of religion for all. Now, keep in mind that the Temple Mount is holy for both Jews, the holiest site in Judaism, for Christians and Muslims, as it is the third holiest site in Islam. But in response to Khalis that said that Israel is killing Palestinians in Gaza, Khalis and many others don't talk about the fact that rockets misfired by Hamas killed Palestinians as well last year, including children. So not to talk about politics, Israel is not the enemy of Palestinians. It's their own people. But don't believe me, ask the Palestinian people when cameras are off. They get jobs in Israel, over 100,000. They get medical care in Israel. They know that if they need something, they turn to Israel. When I served in the Israeli army, that's what I saw. Now, it's actually interesting because before this space, I spoke to a Muslim friend of mine, a Muslim Arab Israeli, and he was telling me about people that were barricaded inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque and could not get out. The Palestinian radicals did not allow them to get out. So that's a huge problem. And speaking about, sorry that I'm shifting quickly. I just want to get all the information out there. But for those of you that don't know, I'm creating videos about Israel, and I got many comments from people in Lebanon, people from Ramallah, Nablus, telling me that they understand Israel's struggle. Now, the fact that more than 45 rockets were launched into Israel from both Lebanon and Gaza is insane. Because imagine if one rocket was fired into London or Berlin or Sydney. No one would put up with that. But when it's 45 rockets, I do not see the international community summoning an emergency Security Council meeting on that, or a very loud condemnation of this attack on a sovereign country. Putting aside the issue with the Palestinians, whom I cherish and love, by the way, as an Israeli, but the fact that rockets were launched at a sovereign state, this is unacceptable. And the mainstream media was not talking about this. And the fact that Israel is surrounded by neighbors that continuously call for Israel's destruction, not very much like Europe, that puts Israel in a survival mode. That's why we have a strong army, and that's because we have no other option. It's either living or not existing.
Sina, I want to bring you in. Just your thoughts about the mainstream media, because the argument is a similar argument made from both sides of that. I mean, I've heard it for the first time from Hanani, but in terms of from the Palestinian side, that basically, again, there's no coverage when it comes to Palestinian issues. So, Sina, if you want to give us your thoughts on that, and then any other point.
Sure. Yeah. Well, first, thank you so much for having me. And I just want to begin by also expressing how sorry I am for the loss of innocent life and the violence that has erupted right now, including the 2 Israelis that were killed in the West Bank. With respect to the mainstream media, I mean, certainly in the West, in the US especially, historically there's been a bias in favor of Israel. I would argue that that has been changing in recent years, especially as the US-Israeli relationship has become more partisan, which I would say has been largely due to the actions of Netanyahu previously, and especially amongst the Democratic Party, that many members of Congress are now more openly critical of Israel. You famously had AOC say, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, the member of Congress from New York, who's very popular amongst young people, who said last year, actually, when there was another cycle of violence and escalation, that apartheid states are not democracies. So here you had one of the most popular American politicians explicitly calling Israel an apartheid state, which is very significant. But with that, I mean, in America, it is, I would say that there was historically a taboo even to criticize Israel, which is now breaking. And I think another part of this that's very important, I think is the root cause of this violence that I haven't seen addressed. I mean, yes, I mean, this is another cycle of violence and this conflict that has been, many decades old. But the root cause, I would strongly argue, is Israel's illegal occupation, the settlement expansion, evictions, all the restrictions on Palestinians. And until this is addressed, this conflict will not be over. And just to mention about Iran's role in all of this, which I think is important, I would actually argue that this cycle of violence started before even the event in Al-Aqsa, with Israel targeting Iranian targets in Syria, which actually resulted in 2 IRGC members being killed. And then Iran, this time actually, and it's rare that Iranian targets are killed. Usually it's like Iran's proxy allied militias there. And so for these Iranian people who were killed, Iran actually vowed retaliation. And now we actually see in this new cycle that these attacks from Lebanon actually, I think, change the strategic picture in significant ways, where now it seems like this new front that, even rockets from Syria have come into Israel previously. And now it seems like Iran has had a role in potentially opening up this new front in kind of Lebanon. And obviously, thankfully, that this did not erupt into a whole war. But I think it is a demonstration of capability. And I think the Iranians were trying to reinforce deterrence with respect to what happened in Syria last week. And with this round quieting down and this demonstration of this new front in Lebanon, maybe that deterrence has been established, but we will have to see about that.
Carmine, you've had your hand up for a while. Your thoughts?
Thank you, Mario. I don't know. I think it's absurd. I listen to a lot of commentary, and a lot of times I think it's absurd that Israel, it seems to me that people want Israel to be the only nation in the world where you can just lob rockets in and they got to take it and not defend themselves. And, the excuse of it was a place of worship when there's people inside barricaded who are attacking Israeli forces. You can't just use a place of worship as cover, which has been traditionally done. And when you go back to, you say, well, there was been a lot of attacks on Ramadan. Well, the fact is some Palestinians in these terror groups, Hamas, Hezbollah, choose to celebrate their holidays by attacking Jewish people and killing Jewish people. And that's the celebration. And they hand out candy when it's done. So, I've never, if people in Mexico were lobbing rockets into the United States, there would be no discussion. There would be no talk. They would be decimated, and nobody would ask the United States to stand down. But only in Israel do we ask them to have this ridiculous level of tolerance to be hated, attacked, and murdered. It just seems to be absurd. And as far as the American media goes, it has not had a pro-Israel bias in a long time. Not if you're watching CNN, MSNBC, ABC, or any of those networks who portray Israel as Darth Vader and this evil villain on a consistent basis. So I think people are not being fair to Israel, and we're asking Israel to do what we would ask no other nation on this planet to do.
So I want to bring in Shima. Oh, sorry, Hilly, so you wanted to come back and then I'll go to Shima.
Yeah, I did. Look, I think okay. So, common, your rocket point. I understand. Okay, no nation should tolerate rockets coming in from its neighboring countries. I agree with that. But then this is something that happens between neighboring countries. Okay, Saudi, Yemen. I touched on that earlier. And neighboring countries, Saudis bombing the hell out of Yemen, killing people. So it happens, right? But here's the thing. If you're going to call it out, then you have to call it out, because Israel is committing apartheid on Palestinians. Israel is keeping the people of Gaza caged like animals at the moment. Israel has so many, and I say this all the time, UN resolutions against the crimes against humanity and literally the treatment of Palestinians, but those resolutions are vetoed every single time by the United States of America. At the United Nations. So if you want equal and fair treatment, then get rid of all these protections you've got. Become a member of the ICC, sign up to it. Say, look, our human rights are going to be held to the International Criminal Court, and we don't want these resolutions to be vetoed at the United Nations. If the United Nations, and this applies to both sides, but then, somebody asked me this last night, I think it was Benjamin, about Hamas, and said, well, would you say the same about Hamas? Yeah, absolutely, I would. But nobody goes and vetoes any regulations that, or resolutions, that come up at the United Nations for Hamas. So let's clear the board and be treated like an equal country without all these special provisions from the United States of America. Reject the military aid they give you every year and stand on your own and say, no, we want peace in our region. We don't want outside interference. But until you can call all of that out, we can make it about rockets if you want, but nobody's buying it anymore.
Ben, you got your hand up.
Yeah, so just two brief points to a few speakers ago. I'm not sure who it was. A very nice gentleman. In terms of Iran trying to send some type of message, I think that argument, in my opinion, falls flat. Iran, not that long ago, I think 2 months ago, a month and a half ago, they got sent a message clearly by Israel when we struck their drone manufacturing facilities. That's number one. So I don't think that Iran is trying to send any message, because the response to that message would be devastating, and they know that. Now, in terms of the UN, I'd like maybe Khalisa could answer me this. So how many UN resolutions are there against North Korea, against Saudi Arabia, against Iran, against Syria, against all these other countries which go to the UN and raise their hand and say, well, Israel is doing this and that. So I think we have to be cognizant of the fact that whether you like it or not, there clearly is an anti-Israel bias at the UN. So when the resolutions start passing towards those countries, that people are now looking, I guess, towards as some type of moral compass, Iran, Saudi Arabia, then I guess we could discuss, bringing Israel more into the fold. But I think you would even concede the fact that there are other countries that commit very egregious crimes and so forth. And I really hear silence from the international community about them, right?
So Benjamin, look, I'm not defending the human rights atrocities in the countries that you've actually mentioned. I think they should be held to account. But the thing that they're not doing is what I've said. I don't see any of those countries having created an open-air prison for a significant part of their population in the tiniest, most densely populated... sorry, Benjamin, your mic's open. Let me just finish. Benjamin, please, let me just finish. Yeah, sorry. So let me just finish. It is called the most densely populated place in the world. When David Cameron stood for elections in the UK, obviously being a Tory, he changed his mind once he won. But when he stood for the elections, he actually called it out and said, Gaza is the biggest open air prison in the world. And you know, this has to be called out. It's apartheid. It's the apartheid I'm taking issues with. It's not about Iran or what Iran does or what Saudi Arabia does or anything like that. Because the thing is, Iran, I don't see the leaders of Saudi Arabia calling themselves out as the victim when they're the aggressor. I don't see the leaders of Iran saying we're the victim when they're the aggressor, but I see the Israeli government constantly saying, oh, look what the Palestinians have done to us. We live in terror all the time. This is an atrocity against us. We need all this support. We need all the money we can get. We need the fundraising, and we control the media narrative. Somebody mentioned media on here earlier. The BBC initially reported what happened 4 days ago as clashes. And then 5 hours later, they changed their headline to show the true reality of what was happening. The Guardian did the same. So, and I can give you example after example after example of how the media narrative runs and call it out. So let's look at this from a broader picture.
I want to go to Hanani, just to balance it out. Hanani?
Hi, yeah. I just wanted to talk about the apartheid that Khalisa was talking about, because I think that as an Israeli, to me, it feels like it's quite the opposite, that there is apartheid against Israelis. Because look at the simple fact that as an Israeli who holds an Israeli passport, I cannot travel to Ramallah, I cannot travel to Bethlehem, only because I'm an Israeli. Palestinians can enter Tel Aviv. I cannot buy any land or house in Palestinian cities, and I cannot enter. I'm banned from entering Temple Mount. Only from all 12 gates that lead to the Temple Mount, only one, the Mughrabi gate, at specific hours. Now, mind you, that this is where the ancient temples stood thousands of years ago. Now, all these things. This is the real apartheid. Now, Khalisa would probably refer to the apartheid wall, the separation wall, that is, in fact, it's decreased suicide bombing attacks in Israeli cities down to zero. Now, talking about the largest prison in Gaza, which is such a big title, sounds really bad, but you know, if you look at the facts, actually, Egypt also shares the border with Gaza. Now, if you see both Egypt and Israel, they closed down their borders to Gaza. Now, why is that? Maybe it's because of Hamas, a terror group that in his 1988 charter calls for the destruction of Israel. So we're not quite happy about them wanting to destroy us, and we will do whatever we can to defend our future.
Yeah, so you know what? When you say that you can't go into certain areas, I would say this to you: who is the occupying force? The occupying force of that country are not the Palestinians, the Israelis. So if there are areas, somebody said on this space yesterday, actually, funnily enough, I can't go into Nablus to buy my naan bread because I could get killed as an Israeli walking into Nablus. And I said, wasn't it just a few days ago that the IOF went in and shot Palestinians in Nablus? And they said, I'm talking about citizens. I'm not talking about, you know, the police. When your police are going into certain areas and shooting people point blank in the middle of the day, and then you say, I can't go into those areas, that's not apartheid. You are the occupying force. That's my point.
The Israeli citizens are not the occupied.
Wait.
No, I agree. I agree with that. Look, this is the thing, right? So when I'm talking about this, I'm talking about the government. I'm not talking about the people. I firmly believe, I have been there, and I firmly believe that the Israeli citizens and Palestinian citizens, yes, there's fringe elements in every community, okay, who think differently. But, and I'm talking every community, including UK, everywhere you go. But generally speaking, I found that they will live side by side in peace. They do live side by side in peace. They're tired of it on either side, right? The citizens I'm talking about, they all want peace. Whichever side you look at, you know, that children are dying, people are living in terror, 2 people died today, you know, their families are going to suffer. You're telling me their families won't want peace? Their neighborhoods don't want peace. So yeah, I agree with that. The citizens all want peace. What I'm saying is that if you want to get from where you are today to that point, then you have to acknowledge what the problem is. And I find that this resistance, it's always two-sided. You know, Israel's not an apartheid state. We are the victims in this. And for as long as you keep thinking that, you're never going to, I mean, I'll call out Hamas, I'll call out Hezbollah. That's fine. I'm very pro-Palestinian rights, though, because they deserve the dignity of living a decent life, and they do not get that under the current regime, the apartheid regime in Israel. They do not deserve to be caged up like animals in Gaza with their water poisoned and their agriculture destroyed. That's not what they deserve. So I think you have to move beyond where we are with narratives and say, okay, we have a problem. Let's look at that problem honestly from all sides, and then say, okay, yeah, there is an issue here.
Well, I have to quickly respond to that because Hamas builds terror tunnels for $3 million each. So why isn't this money channeled to help Palestinian people? I love Palestinian people. They're not my enemy. Palestinians know that Israelis are not their enemies. Their own leadership is their enemy. Now, talking about occupation, wherever you dig in this land, you will find out Jewish history, but that's not the point. I think that we need to focus, Israelis and Palestinians, on how to build mutual future together and eradicate radicalism and terrorism on both sides.
I like the second point, Hanania, but the first point you made about the tunnels, yes, Hamas do have tunnels, okay, in Gaza, and they get the rockets smuggled through those tunnels in Gaza. But then you know what? If you're going to call out their rockets and their tunnels, then you've got to call out the military might of your government that's sponsored by the United States of America. In fact, every time I'm on American spaces, and these guys are talking about, you know, Ukraine, Russia, I say, do you know what? If I was an American, the first thing I would call out to my government is, excuse me, why are my taxes going to the Middle East every year to kill Palestinians? You know, my taxes are actually killing Palestinian people, and I don't want that anymore. Stop the money going to Israel. And that's the first thing I would do if I was an American.
If I may as well just interject very quickly. Sorry, just on the point on Israelis not being able to go to the West Bank, I think, I find that very striking. I mean, the biggest obstacle to a peace process right now is that there are over 500,000 Israeli settlers who've gone to the West Bank, who've taken control of the best land, and who've instituted an objectively, empirically apartheid regime where they have the access to their own roads, their own services, and Palestinians are, isolated in all these tiny pockets and ruled over through a military occupation, through checkpoints, massive restrictions on their movement. So I find it, it's just objectively, there's, hundreds of thousands of some of the most zealous, religious, fanatical kind of elements of Israeli society who are motivated by messianic beliefs in many times, who are trying to take over this land in service of a religious ideology. And also this actually goes back to the point of the protests in Israel and Netanyahu using this as a distraction. And I felt like one of the previous speakers was trying to downplay the protests. I mean, this is an unprecedented protest movement in Israel that is first time in its history that you have.
It's not the first time in its history, not whatsoever.
Of this scope, okay? Yeah. Absolutely, where you have hundreds of thousands of people out every week for many, many weeks, and you have ministers of the government, former ministers warning of civil war. You have airline, military pilots and reservists leaving their duties. And this goes to the heart of, from what my Israeli friends tell me, is the division in Israeli society, which is not unlike the division in American society, which is a culture war for the future of Israel, where you have a secular, liberal segment of Israeli society, and you have a religiously fundamentalist segment of Israeli society in the right wing, and they are fighting for the future of Israel. And to me, it seems like the right wing in Israel, just as much as they are trying to oppress and annex the Palestinian land, they also want to eliminate the secular liberal branch of Israeli state and create a religious fundamentalist state. And you saw an advisor to one of the Israeli ministers right now. We have a fascist minister of, I believe it's finance. And this advisor literally said, we want to create a monarchy in Israel, a kingdom of David or something like that. So these are some of the voices that are shaping this new, very right-wing, very fanatical Israeli government.
So Mohammed, thanks for joining us. Oh, sorry, one second. Mohammed, Mohammed, thanks for joining us. So I know you're from Gaza and generally live in Gaza. Are you in Gaza right now?
Hi, not at the moment, but if I can take a minute to answer, sorry to jump in late, but I can pick on 3 points that were mentioned that I got to listen to. First, Israelis can go to the West Bank and can live there. I have an Israeli friend, Sari Bashi from Human Rights Watch, who's married to a Palestinian and lives in Ramallah. And she writes a column in the Israeli newspaper Haaretz under the name of Furat. The signs that tell Israelis that they're not allowed to go into Palestinian cities in the West Bank are put by the Israeli government, not by the Palestinian one. In Gaza, it's a different story. There, Israel does not allow Israelis to go into Gaza. That's again Israel's own government. The last Israeli to be in Gaza was Amira Haas, the Haaretz veteran journalist who got arrested on her way out by the Israeli government themselves because she went into what they deemed as enemy territory or a hostile entity. And ironically enough, the top leader of Hamas, Ismail Haniyeh, he has 2 sisters that have Israeli citizenship and live in the Negev in Israel, married and have children. They cannot go into Gaza to visit their own brother. They went there one time, and that was through Jordan, Egypt, and in Gaza in 2012, and they were arrested on the way back. So Israel is not allowed into the occupied territories. I think that's a bit insulting to people's intelligence. The other point in terms of tunnels, well, the way the tunnels started was basically the way that they started on a massive scale, 2007 and upwards, was basically to smuggle in basic subsistence commodities that Israel was not allowing in. They were not allowing even processed hummus. They were not allowing pasta because they didn't deem it humanitarian. You can look up John Kerry visits Gaza's borders. That's the keywords that you can use on Google. You will see when John Kerry was a senator, he went to visit the borders. He found out that pasta is not allowed into Gaza. He asked why, and they told him because it's not humanitarian. Rice is allowed, but pasta is not. And I remember commodities came through these tunnels that were built with Egypt. And some of them were, I think, very popular snacks in the US that are called Twinkies, these sponge cakes. And crisps, chips that were smuggled, they were turned into mush from all the smashing on the way. And I remember when my own dad went to buy a couple of these, it was a very overcrowded market. It was the first time we see these in over a year. And when he managed finally to buy a pack of these, I didn't even dare to eat mine. I wanted to treasure it because I hadn't seen any of that food for a very long time. So that's when the tunnels started. Now with the tunnels as a tactic, well, recently or yesterday even, Israel bombed 2 tunnels in Gaza. They said this precisely about them. They said these are terror tunnels, but they do not go into Israeli territory. They remain in Gaza. So there is a dimension to them that Hamas used as an armed group, a non-state actor armed group in Gaza, used the tunnels to build hideouts or to build secret passages, tactical advantage between places in preparation of an Israeli ground invasion into Gaza. There were tunnels that were crossing into Israel, and Hamas used them previously once to kidnap an Israeli military soldier, Gilad Shalit, and another time they used them to go and attack a military post. And per the Israeli military, they said that when Hamas got out of the tunnels, they had 2 choices: attack the military post or go and attack a settlement. And Hamas themselves, they repeat the narrative that we chose to attack the. Well, I have a lot of disagreements with their tactics. But anyway, so they chose the military target, not the civilian one. There hasn't been any record of Hamas using tunnels against Israeli civilian towns. The last point about tunnels is that Israel claims to have built recently a wall around Gaza that goes deep underground to prevent any tunnels from going in. And they say that that neutralizes them. In terms of otherwise, any action from Gaza, don't take my word for it. I think the most respected authority from an Israeli perspective would be Israel's top general at the time last December, Aviv Kochafi, the chief of staff of the IDF. He said, and I quote verbatim, Hamas does not respond to our attacks, nor does it even consider responding to our attacks. And then he said that if the next 2 months go quietly, or the next 4 months, if I don't remember the precise figure, no, it was until May. If it goes quietly until May, these would be the quietest, the most quiet 2 years for Israel's south, period. That was the end of his statement. There was zero violence emanating from Hamas, from Gaza, and again from Hamas, and underline it. You can disagree with their tactics. Human Rights Watch accuses them of engaging in this indiscriminate violence and targeting of Israel, which may amount to war crimes. But for that, Hamas says we would subject ourselves to the authority of the International Criminal Court if it opens an investigation into Israel and Palestine. The Israeli government said the ICC is anti-Semitic if it opens an investigation, and we will not cooperate. So that's the equation you have. But on a tactical, transactional, pragmatic level, analyzing this, there has been zero attacks from Hamas in the last 2 years, virtually the last 2 years on Israel. And that quiet is part of this transactional relationship in which Israel allows Qatari cash infusions to go into Gaza on a monthly basis. About 30 million, the figure goes up and down, but about 30 million a month goes through Israel into Gaza, and allows some people from Gaza to go and work into Israel. And that shows the extent to which Palestinians are willing to give calm and peace a chance, because 16,000 people go from Gaza to work in Israel on a daily basis, and there has been zero attacks from any of them. They engage with Israelis on a daily basis with zero violence. Hamas did not send any of them to commit attacks, because this created a positive deterrent that gave people in Gaza something to hope for and something to lose if things go down. So that sort of positive deterrent has been more sustainable and more meaningful than crushing brutal force, disproportionate and excessive violence that only creates hatred, bitterness, and fuels the never-ending cycle of attacks and counterattacks. And in that regard, what led to this escalation is basically Gaza's quiet means that it's gone from headlines, which means that Israel stops caring about it, the world stops caring, and the situation in Gaza is a permanent state of non-life. It's not even bare life, it's non-life. I have friends who reached the age of 35 without having ever been able to get a job, to fall in love, to start a family, to put food on the table, to have purpose in life, to move outside their parents' home. And the idea of taking one assaults. So Gaza's calm in that sense takes it out of headlines. And once it's gone, the unrequited unilateral quiet from Gaza is met by the daily, let's say, brutalities, unaccounted brutalities in the West Bank, settler violence, disproportionate and excessive violence in Israeli military raids on Palestinian cities that are meant to be under the Palestinian authorities' full civil and security control per the Oslo Accords, the peace accords, and then the raids in Al-Aqsa. So all of it builds up together over time. It accumulates rage, bitterness, and hostility, and despair as well, because there's also the sense that we've been abandoned. The world has moved on. There's nothing that we can try that would work. Nothing works at all. Try nonviolence, Israel would call economic nonviolence, economic terrorism. Try building an Area C in the occupied West Bank. The Israeli government calls it construction terrorism. Try to go on a hunger strike in prison, that's called terrorism in prison. Try to engage in diplomatic advocacy, that's diplomatic terrorism. Work at a human rights NGO, that is considered terrorists in suits. So there's the feeling that nothing works, and there's this constant brutality, provocations on the ground that builds up over time. Jerusalem is always the trigger, and that's what we see with the last escalation. It worked as well in 2021 in May. It always works as the trigger for rage and despair that has accumulated over a very long period of time. So with Al-Aqsa Mosque, the Israeli government says that, well, there were a couple of teenagers with fireworks, that's why we went there. The precise first-hand information from the ground says that it was the other way around. There were 5 to 6 teenagers according to the pictures and videos that Israel's government itself released, 5 to 6 teenagers with 6 packs of firecrackers that they used in a controversial, reckless, but nonetheless a desperate way to fend off against the police raid that came to empty the mosque by force. And they wanted to empty it because Israel bans the Ramadan tradition of i'tikaf, overnight worship. They released this statement from Jordan saying that, look, Jordan is the one that ordered it. It's nonsense. The Jordanian government played along with the Israeli demand at the Aqaba summit and in Sharm el-Sheikh to issue guidelines calling on Palestinians not to perform i'tikaf outside the last 10 days of Ramadan and Saturdays and Fridays. But it did not talk at all about any ban whatsoever. If you read the statement, it doesn't have the word ban or don't do it. It just says we recommend the i'tikaf to be on these nights. And as soon as the Israeli raid happened, Jordan came out immediately and said, we condemn the raid and we support people staying overnight. And we call on them to stay overnight. That was the immediate statement. So it's needless violence and I find this remarkable, and I will conclude here. Sorry for taking too much time. You have Israelis furious, incredibly furious about the minister of chaos, as the New Yorker magazine called him, Itamar Ben-Gvir, convicted terror supporter with a long list of terrorist party, a guy who alleged hateful messages on Palestinian homes and on the premises of the United Nations. Death to the Arabs, may your village burn, whatever slogans you can imagine. And he used to send teenagers, allegedly, that's according to an Israeli journalist that was sent on one of these trips. He would allegedly pay them $60 each for each night of full graffiti and slashing tires and breaking windshields of cars, even at the United Nations headquarters in Jerusalem. Now he's the Minister of National Security. The entire Israeli opposition considers him a lunatic. You have one statement after the other from Yair Lapid, from Benny Gantz, from Naftali Bennett, Avigdor Lieberman, calling this guy a reckless lunatic. They call him the pita bread minister because he banned Palestinian prisoners from receiving or baking their own pita bread, and then filmed a TikTok video of himself stuffing his face with bread and saying, guess who's not getting any? So you have Israelis agreeing that this guy is a lunatic. But as soon as he issues lunatic instructions to the police and the police acts on it, and the Israeli far right feels enabled to act with immunity because they think that he has their back, as soon as this happens, you see a united front from supporters of Israel trying to justify and spin and twist this lunatic's orders. And this is unfathomable. It's not a PR contest. It's a matter of life or death for millions and millions of people on the ground.
Okay, guys. Thank you, Mohammed. I appreciate it. So real quick, I've got some breaking news actually going right now. So getting some on-the-ground reporting. There was a rocket that touched down in Tel Aviv. Not sure of injuries yet. And more concerning as well, there was let me pull this up real quick. I guess there was a person in a vehicle that was... It was basically a vehicle attack. So it was a shooting and a car ramming attack. And it says that the driver has been neutralized. And this is in Israel as well. Rocket sirens are sounding again in southern Israel. And so regarding the shooting here, MDA spokesperson at 2141 MDA's 101 call center in the Dan area received a report of gunshot wounds on Professor Yehezkel Koitman Street in Tel Aviv. From a preliminary report only, MDA medics and paramedics provide medical treatment to 2 wounded people on the spot. Terrorist is neutralized. Shooting incident in Tel Aviv, 7 injured, of which 2 are in serious condition. According to eyewitnesses, the person had an improvised weapon, and apparently he ran into a stop and thus prevented a larger attack, and he was neutralized by civilians. So there's a lot going on right now in Tel Aviv. But Ben, I think you wanted to respond to this. We got a couple speakers here, and we're trying to get more people in. But I just wanted to kind of update you guys with the latest stuff going on.
Yeah. I just wanted to respond to the last speaker. Listen, you sound like an absolutely wonderful person. I respect everything that you've said, and I appreciate the demeanor in which you said it. But if we're going to deal with the facts, you conceded that at least to some degree, these tunnels are indeed used to facilitate the smuggling of weaponry, which is, in some way or another, used to attack Israel. So I'm sorry, but at the end of the day, that makes it a completely legitimate military target. Now, in terms of Hamas, you spoke with them very, very lovely, and that they're trying maybe to reform themselves, and you gave a very eloquent speech about it. But at the end of the day, Hamas is a legitimate military target. I'm sorry, it is. Let's just be very blunt here. This is not a group which is saying, listen, let's try to come to the negotiation table. Let's try to do this, try to do that, right? This is a group whose sole purpose is to destroy not Israel, but the Jews of Israel. Let's just be very clear here. So, I don't necessarily think that giving them a pass saying, well, it's been quiet, this and that, because one Israeli general said something is really being honest with ourselves, right? And I think that, look, for all the words and so forth that come out of other democracies, they understand perfectly well, right? So before they criticize and condemn Israeli actions, they always say, listen, Israel has a right to defend herself, because it does. So I'm not going to listen, the occupation and so forth, that is a separate topic. But at the end of the day, before any of the occupation or however you want to phrase it ends, there's just not going to be a situation in which the citizens of Israel are going to sit by and allow rockets to fall on them, right? And the government of Israel, whether you like it or not, has an absolute responsibility to defend the people of Israel. And I'm sorry, when Hamas is the ones launching the rockets and embedding themselves within civilians, I'm sorry, if Hamas launches a rocket from a hospital, as awful as this sounds, that hospital, if they indeed embedded themselves with that, if that hospital is used as a launching pad to strike Israeli citizens, that hospital becomes, under international law and military law, a legitimate target. That's the way conflict and war goes. It's a very sad situation. I personally wish that, everyone, all parties involved could sit down and figure this out. But we have to be honest, right? So that was my only point, talking about Hamas like they're this wonderful little human rights group and stuff like that. No, they're not. I mean, let's just be very frank about that, right? And now there's been quiet recently, sure, but that is not the case over the last few decades. And I think you would concede that point. In any case, listen, you sound like a wonderful person, so I just wanted to respond to that. But thank you.
Can I answer quickly?
Yes, go ahead.
Well, thank you so much for responding in a civil way. I appreciate it. I'm not going to go into details about Hamas. You can read my articles about it. There's how things actually are. This is not the same as legitimizing. Let's ignore the details, nitty-gritty details of what Hamas is or is not. Again, I said I support the ICC investigation into Israel-Palestine, which can hold both sides accountable. Every Palestinian supports that. Israel does not support it unanimously. You cannot get anyone from the Israeli left or right to say that they support an investigation into possible war crimes committed by both parties. So as long as we're not there, it's a very controversial issue in terms of judging who's right and who's wrong. In terms of Hamas, not as a group, not what it does, but let's say as an obstacle, if we take it from an Israeli perspective, and how does Israel conceive a solution to that? I have the answer of what Israel does not consider a solution. Netanyahu saying in 2019 in Israel Hayom, saying that I will not deal a striking blow to Hamas. And now I will quote verbatim. He says, because this will give Gaza to Abu Mazen, and I don't want to give Gaza to Abu Mazen. The connection between Gaza and the West Bank has been severed, and in the long run, that prevents a Palestinian state. And then Netanyahu saying in the Jerusalem Post, I think Lahav Harkov, the journalist that reported on it, the headline was, Netanyahu, money to Hamas, part of a strategy to keep Palestinians divided, in which Netanyahu described as we keep strengthening Hamas with that Qatari money, and his other strategy is weakening the Palestinian Authority that's been his peace partner and collaborator for so long. As long as he weakens them and strengthens Hamas, that would prevent Palestinian statehood. That was his verbatim argument, saying money to Hamas, part of a strategy to keep Palestinians divided. So a military option is not on the table. Israel will not end them militarily. If you look at the Rand Corporation, they have a study that's called How Terrorist Groups End. They looked, if I remember the figure correctly, about 620 something groups between the years 1968 until 2008. The headline of the study, How Terrorist Groups End. And they said that, well, only about 11% were defeated militarily. And then about 40% of small groups of less than 1,000 members were defeated through policing or assassination of top leaders. The vast majority were defeated through a process of political incorporation and dialogue. That was the process that you can see with the IRA in Ireland, the Sinn Féin being the political negotiator, the IRA being the armed group. You could not dismantle it, you couldn't take it down. There you had therefore to engage in dialogue. And Hamas, like any group, it has an element of hardliners. I've written extensively condemning someone, for instance, like Fatih Hamad for making some controversial anti-Semitic remarks. But it also has people that Tony Blair, the Prime Minister of the UK, said we were wrong to boycott Hamas, because it has people that Israel itself knows you can do business with. You don't have to like the movement, but in terms of making things work for Palestinians, you have one of two options. You have to try to work forward a solution and make the best of what you have, because you cannot choose your partners, or you can use Hamas as a scarecrow to legitimize whatever brutality is inflicted on Palestinians by saying that this is self-inflicted misery. That's one of the first canards and tropes that I hear whenever there's any brutality going in Gaza, for example. Pro-Israeli voices would come out and say that, well, they voted for Hamas, so they deserve it. That's self-inflicted misery. Although if you look at the numbers, that's also another story, and what led to that vote about 20 years ago. But so in terms of being practical and pragmatic, do we want to use this group as a scarecrow to legitimize the status quo, a very violent status quo that's leading to attacks? Or do we want to try to look at what could work, what could prevent the loss of lives, and what could prevent attacks on both sides? And in that sense, there's a way forward, giving Palestinians some dignity and a little bit more room to get a taste of the bare minimum of a normal life. And you can see it working in Gaza per Israeli accounts, saying that the positive deterrent created in Gaza is leading to credible results, that there has been zero attacks from the people going in and out. There were zero rocket attacks from Hamas when Israel went and bombed the Islamic Jihad in Gaza in 2022, Operation Breaking Dawn. So in that sense, you can either build on that, on a positive deterrent in terms of progress and hope, or you can go the Ben Gvir Smotrich way, which is saying we need to deal a crushing defeat to the enemy, and the enemy is the Palestinians as a collective. And I know that because Smotrich, he had a plan in 2017 that he called the subjugation plan, So that plan was reading thus. He said this aims to kill Palestinian national hope of a state, because that's their starting point to do any active policy. And he said this would give Palestinians three options. Number one, flee, leave the land, immigrate, depopulate the West Bank and Gaza. Number two, accept living as inferior, literally what the meaning of what he was saying, accept to live as second-class non-citizens, inferior status permanently. And the third option is do something about it and you will be dealt with. And he said our forces are well equipped to deal with it. These are his three options for Palestinians. And it's not his personal conviction. The movement that he represents, which is Utzma Yahudit, religious Zionism, and it extends to elements of Likud and Shas, a peace agreement with the Palestinians, with Egypt, is a defeat and a compromise that is a shameful surrender. So Smotrich went to the borders of Gaza on the eve of forming the government, to the Rosh Qatif Museum. He signed a letter there that said that leaving the Rosh Qatif settlement in Gaza was a terrible surrender or a defeat, unforgivable. And he said, we will return, and that we will return to Gaza to retake and build settlements in Gaza. As insane as that gets, is a sentiment shared by his entire party and by Ben Gvir Otzma Yehudit party. And I can point to statement after statement from each one of them. But then you have today Smotrich and his faction, and Ben Gvir's as well, the Israeli far right, pointing and saying that, okay, the Oslo Accord is to blame for all of this. If you look at it from this perspective, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I really want to jump in and yeah. So first of all, I just want to say that as we are talking, I think that it's just insane that the radical Islamist terrorists carried out another terrorist attack, and we're looking at least 7 people wounded and 1 killed. I'm just now checking with the Israeli National Emergency Services, and they're telling me that there is 1 killed. But in quick response to respectfully to disagree with what Muhammad is saying here, it's not about what liberals are doing and talking a lot about politics. Hey, I'm an Israeli guy. I don't care about politics. I'm a human being and I want to live safe and sound. I don't want to get to work and get stabbed. I don't want my wife to go shopping and to wonder whether she's going to come back alive or not, only because she is a Jew living in her ancestral homeland, Israel. I grew up in Israel. I was never taught to hate Palestinians. I was taught that they're my neighbors. But on the other hand, in Palestinian schools, they're teaching them that Israel does not have the right to exist, and that they're chanting this slogan, Free Palestine, that for those of us that don't know what that means, it's from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. They want Palestine to be free. Now, that's exactly where Israel is existing. So what they're basically calling for is the annihilation of my nation and my people. And frankly, we're not okay with that. It's okay to talk about politics and it's okay to talk about agendas. But at the end of the day, there are people here, like myself, my family, that we want to go to bed knowing that we're safe, that we don't need to. Last night, I slept with clothes on, with my shoes next to my bed, because I didn't know whether I will need to run to the bomb shelter or not. And I just want people to understand the reality on the ground here, that it's a crazy, unbelievable situation for Jews and Israelis, Arabs as well. I just have to quickly say that from the rocket attack that came from Lebanon, the barrage of rocket attack, a friend of mine was wounded, and he's a Druze Arab, Druze Israeli, call it how you want it, but a Druze was wounded from a shrapnel from the rocket. So those terrorists, keep in mind, they're targeting Jews and Arabs alike. They don't care who they target. They act out of hate for Israel. When I defend Israel, I defend because I love my country. I don't hate Palestinians, but I know that people need to understand and make this difference between politicians and people on the ground. Thank you so much for allowing me to say that real quick. And I do want to say that if you can allow also a good reporter and friend, Peter Lerner, I think that he could really add some insights to this.
Well,
Yeah, sure. I believe he's on the list. Am I right?
He's actually on stage. He's actually on stage.
Oh, okay.
I'm here. I am here.
Go ahead, Peter.
Brilliant. So, I mean, just before I get to LTC, I mean, this is the issue with the entire conflict. Like, you're right. Israelis shouldn't be living under fear of getting like in the way you described, and similarly Palestinians shouldn't, because they, in the same manner, they basically, when they get bombed, they don't have a situation, and they don't even have bomb shelters. So this is why these spaces are important, that people can see and understand other people, and hopefully come to some kind of understanding of the other side, so that it's not as black and white as the way it's being portrayed.
Salman, can I just jump in? Yeah, it's all right. That's one of the points I was going to make. That Hanania, you're right. You know, you're living in fear, okay? But at least you have a shelter to go to. Can you imagine if you were caged in, and you knew in that little strip of land a bomb can hit any time, and you have nowhere to go and nowhere to run? There's nothing you can do. So things could be worse. You know, I mean, you've got it bad, but things could be worse. And the other thing I want to see is that from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. What that song represents for the millions of Palestinians that chant it is free from occupation. And there may be people who misconstrue that. I'm not saying it. And take it to a different level of meaning. But from the good-hearted Palestinians...
Even then, Halisi, that chant, about other issues I've got, like, I can have we can have a discussion, look at the different positions. But in my view, what happened is that's intentionally been misframed.
Exactly.
So that people can't use that chant anymore. In reality, when people ask for that chant, they actually ask for freedom. But I understand that what the reason
from
why
occupation
is for censorship. So basically, people don't do the chant. So I disagree with any form of censorship.
Exactly, but this censorship movement for that chant came out of the United States of America. I can pull the data. I was looking at it a few days ago. Yeah, it came out from an organization in America saying, oh, actually, that's anti-Semitic. It's not. And the other thing I want to say is that, you know, Hanania, you love your country, and I'm really glad you do, and everybody should love their country. But when they're patriotic and they love their country, they should want their country to do better. And if I was an Israeli citizen, I would be calling out my government saying, what are you doing? Why are you treating Palestinians in this subhuman level? What gives you the right to keep people caged up and bomb them like that? I mean, there's got to be a proportionate reaction, right? So if I go out on the street with a knife and I go and stab somebody, the police in the UK will come and arrest me. Of course they will. So if somebody does that, I'm hypothetically speaking, a Palestinian does that, yeah, fine. So, you know, go arrest them. They're a criminal. Automatically they don't become a terrorist, and it doesn't give anybody the right to go to their home village and completely shoot people at point blank, kill journalists. You know, this kind of barbaric behavior has to stop. I just want to go to one point before I dropped. I think it's Sina. I don't know if I'm pronouncing his name right, but Sina made a point where he was talking about how he feels that, you know, these are a different kind of protests, and it's the first time in the history of Israel. And I know Benjamin disagreed with him, but the thing is, whenever somebody comes in terms of an official visit from Israel into London, there's always protests, okay? But they're protests from people who are pro-Palestinian. This is the first time in my life outside Downing Street I have seen Jewish brothers and sisters with the Israeli flag shouting shame in Hebrew at Netanyahu as he walked into the doors of Downing Street. I mean, he didn't even normally they spend a few minutes outside, shake hands, the press are there, it's a press opportunity. He literally, that door slammed so quickly once he went into Downing Street, because there were a lot of people there, Israeli people of originally of Israeli descent, who were shouting shame at him. And it's the first time in my life I've seen that. So the tide is turning, and I agree with you, Sina.
Yeah. No, I appreciate you, Khaleesi. Thank you so much. Shima, I know you've been waiting a long time. Go ahead and get in here, please, and then I'm going to go to Ben.
I want to make a few points here. One is talking about big picture. For people who haven't traveled to the region, to Israel nor Palestine, we can't really see what's going on the ground. So someone come up here and say, I can go to this region and this neighborhood. The other one come and say, oh, I cannot go. And they give totally different perspective. So unless someone is on the ground, and as you see, we have two different people and many different people on the ground giving different perspectives. For people who are in the U.S. and other countries constantly say, oh, who can go, who cannot go, we are not there. Number two is that...
So Shima, I'm going to let you carry on, but just to let you know, as far as I know, Hanani is in Israel, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because you did explain his story. And so is Muhammad as well. So
exactly,
yeah. Anyway,
totally two different perspectives. The second one is that if Palestinian and Israeli and everybody in the region want to see peace, they need to get rid of Hamas. Because the Iranian government did not have money to pay them. And the leader of Hamas, it is on YouTube, you can go and say that without Iran, they're going to bankrupt. Without the Islamic Republic regime, Hamas is going to go bankrupt. So yes, if Palestinians are choosing Hamas at some point of their election, then they are making the wrong choice, because Hamas does nothing for Palestinians except getting the money from Iranian people, which Iranian government has no business to do that. Iranian government has no business to be in Syria and spend the money of Iranians and get rid of Hamas to have some peace. Everybody comes here and constantly blame America, America, America. Why don't you talk about Arab states? Where are they on this? Why are they making no comments? Where are any of them? Everything is always blame on Israel and America. Arab states, where's the Arab League? Where is the GCC, Gulf states? Where are they? Quiet. They don't even care about Palestinians. If they want to care, except Jordan that has the refugee camp for Palestinians, none of them care. They don't even talk about this because they do business with Israel now. Before that, they were not doing business with Israel. They were not even talking about this. The third point I want to make is that Khaleesi constantly talk about big picture, big picture. Iranian government is the big picture here. The annihilation and elimination of Israel is in the head of the Islamic Republic regime and the revolution. They want that. Iranian people don't want that. We want peace with Israel. We had good relations with Israel. We had no problem with Palestinians before, but now all of our money is spent in Hamas and Hezbollah. That's the big picture. You talk about prisons. Iranian government has 14,000 people in prison right now because they just expressed their opinion. The fact that Israeli people have the democracy in their system to be able to say whatever to Netanyahu, that's the democracy in Israel. Now, how they treat Palestinians is a different story. But the fact that Israel has a system in place to let their own people have different opinions, to shout and yell at their president or prime minister, that's good for them. Don't blame America and Israel for everything. Look at their own people and their own leaders. Were all the Arab leaders that Palestine had, they're all good, they did a good job? Nothing blame on them? Another point, the last point I want to make is that first it came on the news that people barricaded themselves in the mosque, and then there was an attack, and then 2 days later we see rockets from Hamas. What does this have to do? No one knows. Why they barricaded themselves? No one knows. How did it happen? No one knows. Why Hamas all of a sudden is sending rockets after this to Israel? No one knows. None of this matters. Only people come on the stage and say Israel is apartheid. Say Israel is doing that. At the end of this week or this story, Israel is going to be blamed for all of this. Just watch the news, but nobody's going to ask the root cause of the question, the incidents that are happening here.
Khaleesi, I'll let you respond.
Yeah, so do you know what? I understood part of that, but I don't just, I really don't understand, Shima, what the point of what you're saying is. So you're saying there are massive issues with the leadership in that country. Fine. You know what? There's massive issues in every country. There are domestic issues in every single country, especially in the current economic climate. Hey, look what's happening in France. Look in the UK. We haven't even got an elected prime minister. Look at the USA. What's going on over there? So fine, call that out all you want to. But at the end of the day, I will still call out the United States of America for funding the apartheid Israel. And that's my right to do so. And everyone should be calling it out. So you can conflate this about your whatever agenda you have in regards to Iran or whatever, but it doesn't change the facts. The human rights organizations have been calling out Israel for a long time. And it also says America's complicit in this. So why is America interfering in the domestic affairs of another country? What place does it have to do that? And I will call that out. If somebody came here and started interfering in the United Kingdom, we would rise up and we would call it out. Our country is our own, and we manage all our internal disagreements, whatever they are. We don't need, some parent country coming along and trying to show leadership and fathership and pulling our country's strings. So you're conflating 2 points. It's not about whether or not the leadership is good or not, the Palestinian leadership or the Israeli leadership. It's for the Palestinians and the Israelis to decide who they want as their leaders. It's not up to me to say whether they're good or bad. They may be happy with them. I'm hearing that Hamas is democratically elected. Yes, they rockets. I'm not condoning that at all. I don't know. what they treat Palestinians like, but you know, at the end of the day, they are there, they're the leadership. It doesn't give America the right to fund, you know, the militarization.
Sorry, I will come to you. I just want balance, so I'm trying to go to like one from each side. I don't want that way we can keep it balanced and it'll be a fair discussion. So for that reason, but I will go to you next, Sina. For that reason, I want to go to Peter, and he's had his hand up for a while. Peter, if you want to add anything to the discussion.
Wow, what a discussion we're having here this evening, and thank you for inviting me. I was just I was listening in as the reports of the terrorist attack in Tel Aviv happening, so I'm a bit overwhelmed with everything that's going on. And after listening to so many of the voices and comments made by different people that are weighing in here, Mohammed from Gaza, Khalisi from the UK, and Hanania that I know, of course. I would say that the situation here is a bit more gray area rather than the black and white that everybody wishes it would be. I mean, I've been protesting this government for the last 13 weeks, almost every week, out in the streets with the flag of Israel, protesting about the government policy on everything to do with Israel. And one of the themes that is also prominent in those protests is the need to end the conflict and the occupation, as it's called here, by many. But the context of where we are today in 2023 is one where, in my view, it's made up of lots of misconceptions. And as we can see here this evening, that there is so much energy and frustrations. And actually, I listened to Mohammed, what he was saying, as a Gazan, many times from Gaza, and indeed there's a problem there that needs to be sorted in order for us to progress. Now, the complaint that Gaza is a closed prison, or the largest prison, or whatever you want to call it, is a situation where the reality is a result of the current government there. And as Mohammed rightly pointed out, there are 16,000 workers that come out of Gaza on a daily basis to work in Israel. And indeed, none of them have been involved in terrorist activities. And when they go back to Gaza, they're bringing very good wages compared to Gaza's standards today. So there is a positive way that we forward, but it does both governments, from the Palestinian Authority, from the authority in Gaza, and the Israeli government need to have the ability to see eye to eye that we can live together side by side on this patch of land. Now, unfortunately, there are still many, as seen this evening in Tel Aviv, that haven't come to terms that we are here to stay. And this, I think, is what is the concern for many Israelis from across the political spectrum. I say it as a voter for the Israeli Labour Party, which is the Avodah, and a member of that party. We are concerned with the nature of the relationship we have with Palestinians. And our leadership isn't strong enough to make any concessions or the steps needed in order to create peace. And on the other hand, we have the Palestinian arena, which is divided into two different arenas, where one organization, Hamas, is bent on our destruction, even though maybe, as Mohammed rightly pointed out, over the last 2 years have been very, very passive in their activities against us. And the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah under Mahmoud Abbas that have, unfortunately, his power is declining, and there does not seem to be any sort of notion for peace on their side. And of course, on our side, we have Netanyahu and this right-wing, extreme right-wing government that is completely in the other arena and completely against any sort of conflict resolution. So I would say at the end of the day, we need two, I would say, contending approaches. One of them is a bottom-up approach, where people who are good intentioned, good-willed, want to get on together and can come to terms with the fact that we have to share this land and determine its fate for the future. And on the other hand, we need leaders that can actually bring us to a place where there can be a Jewish Israeli state that can live in this area in peace and in security, and a Palestinian state, on the other hand, that can have live in peace and security and independence. So until those leaders arrive, we have a lot as civil society. We have a lot of work to do, and unfortunately, terrorists and populist politicians seem to hijack the discourse, the narratives, and they set the terms for the stage, which is, in my view, the biggest problem we have today in this region and probably around the world as well, because populist politicians, they seem to be hijacking platforms like Twitter in order to advance their own narrow political agendas. I hope and I pray that this wave of terrorism will end soon. I hope and I pray that we will be able to sit down together with the Palestinians and negotiate an agreement that will satisfy most of the people, because to expect that all of the people will be happy with the result is going a bit too far. But we need the vast majority of both peoples to agree to some certain terms, and that needs to be primed and education and schooling on both sides of the fence, as to say, so that we can move forward and create a vision for the next 100 years. And thank you again for letting me speak.
I appreciate your work. Before we go to the next person, War Monitor, have you got any updates about what's happening?
We do have a shooting/ramming incident in Tel Aviv. I believe I didn't check the last numbers. I think we had about 10 injuries and 1 killed. Yeah, but that's about it.
Thanks for that. Right, Sina, you wanted to say something?
Yes. Thank you. I just wanted to give a quick response to Shima. Now, Shima, with respect, I mean, there's no doubt, the Islamic Republic of Iran, the Iranian government presides over immense human rights abuses against its own people. I would strongly argue that its approach to governance is unsustainable, and that is the path that Iran is right now. But we can't, and I see this from a lot of, unfortunately, pro-Israel voices, that they instrumentalize human rights abuses in Iran and to advance their own agenda, which is centered on abusing the human rights of Palestinians. So we have to be intersectional. I am of Iranian heritage myself, and for me, there can be no human rights for the Iranian people unless Palestinian people have their human rights, and everyone in the region has their human rights. So we can't, at the same time, defend Israeli oppression and dispossession of Palestinians and then claim to stand for human rights in Iran. Then we are betraying that our issue is not really human rights. Our issue is we probably want a pro-Israeli dictatorship in Iran to replace the Islamic Republic, which that's not what the Iranian people want. The Iranian people want democratic transition and relations with the world. And I just also want to say, just to add on top of that, just like it's simplistic to blame everything on America, I agree with that. Shima said it's simply, people blame America. Why do complex? As we discussed earlier, the occupation is the central issue here, and many actors in the region and beyond within these countries take advantage of this situation, especially the Islamic Republic. I think Iran's policies towards Israel-Palestine are guided really by political, ideological, and strategic purposes, but most of all, it's to give the Islamic Republic kind of influence on the Arab streets. And, they actually need enmity for Israel in many ways, for the legitimacy of their own regime. And similarly, I would argue Israel actually needs enmity with Iran for its own legitimacy, especially the Netanyahu government. And we saw in these protests in Israel, I was shocked myself that a minister in Netanyahu's government, a minister of public information or public diplomacy, something like that, she explicitly blamed Iran for the protests. You know, this is something we're used to hearing from like Iranian officials who blame foreign intervention, that the Israelis are actually blaming Iran, which is incredibly far-fetched, that they would get hundreds of thousands of Israelis, including the previous speaker, out onto the streets of their own country to protest. And we also saw that this escalation cycle, as we also talked about, that Netanyahu, in the midst of this unprecedented situation in Israel, in the midst of the Israeli president warning about civil war, reservists, again, not going to their duty, their military duty, that Netanyahu launches these strikes in Syria, kills these Iranian IRGC members, and then you have these two kind of narrow-minded, self-serving regimes taking advantage of their situation to advance their own interests. So that's, I'll just leave it at that for now.
I want to go to Benjamin.
Yeah, I think it's just, you know, on a maybe a little bit of a lighter topic. You know, I know there's a lot of people listening, right? So, yes, of course, the tensions get high and so forth. But, you know, over in Israel, there's not arguments every day, right? Like the way that we're interacting on here with our opinions and stuff is fine. But, you know, I would argue you're probably approaching between 80 and 85% of Palestinians and 80 to 85% of Israelis simply want to live like normal human beings, right? One of the so my father was in the military for many years. He became a lawyer, and he was a legal advisor at Sharm el Sheikh in the Taba agreements. And one of his best friends to the day he died was a man named Abu Allah Ahmed Khoury. He was a Palestinian negotiator, and he said something once that I'll never forget. We were having a coffee in Tel Aviv, and he looked at my father and he said, you know, I know how it is difficult for your side. Those were his exact words. It was in English. I know how it's difficult for your side, you know, but you need to understand how it's difficult for us. And, you know, his bottom line point was that any agreement that the Palestinian side needed to be supported by the majority of the Palestinians, not a minority, not 20 to 30%. So I understand that. So I just wanted to say to everyone listening here, you know, I'm born in Israel, and I know there's a lot of Palestinians and Muslims here, and we have our differences of opinions, right? Because it's a very heated topic. But at the end of the day, you know, this is not the way that the majority of interactions are overseas. Yes, there's flare-ups on both sides, but you know, for the most part, everyone just wants to live like normal human beings in peace on both sides. So I just wanted to say, you know, to all the Palestinians and the Muslims and people who are even anti-Israel in the room that we're speaking to and so forth, it's a great dialogue to have, right? You know, we can all speak to each other with respect and stuff. Don't worry, when I'm the Prime Minister of Israel and Suleiman, I will install you as the Palestinian PM. You know what? We'll make peace. I'm just kidding.
Congratulations.
Mohammed, thanks for that. Motion there. Thanks for that.
Thank you so much.
Mohammed, go for it.
I'm very grateful for the civility in the room and being productive and policy oriented. And in that spirit, I'll go ahead, sorry.
Yeah, I'll finish with this. So, look, I was born and raised in a city called Herzliya Petuach. It's a very nice place in Israel. You know, I can say this, that while obviously I am very pro-Israel and I support Israel and so forth, I'm absolutely, you know, I'm not going to be, I'm objective enough to say that I can absolutely understand, and I'll get some, pardon my language, I'm going to get shit from this in my DMs, but of course I understand not only where the Palestinians are coming from, but I can also understand why why Hamas was democratically elected in the majority, right? Yes, of course they're a terrorist group, but they do a lot of humanitarian work for the Palestinians. I mean, I can't be so closed-minded to say that they don't, right? We have to have an honest dialogue here. So I get it. Of course I get it. I understand why people support Hamas. I might not like it, but I understand it. So, you know, as long as people can understand where I'm coming from, I can absolutely understand where they're coming from. And I think that's the key to moving forward with anything. You know, some of the best conversations I've had with the quote other side have been here. On spaces like this, right? And yeah, so that's all I wanted to say.
Can I know that you, Muhammad, was speaking.
Go ahead.
But Yeah, thank you, Mohammed. I just want to say something here, right? Because Benjamin, you've said something really interesting. And by the way, I endorse everything you said before that about how the majority of Palestinians and Jewish people do want to live in peace. You know, and I see this time and time again. But I guess it's the politics of it that actually paints a completely different picture. But you said something really interesting about Hamas, right? And I applaud you for saying that, because one of the thoughts that I had, and I may have touched on this in the space yesterday, is I want someone to name me one organization, just one, that in the history or to date, right, has resisted the United States of America or Israel or Western occupation and not being called a terrorist organization. Because when I look at Nelson Mandela's ANC, I believe that was also deemed a terrorist organization, and yet we applauded it when it went and won the elections in South Africa. Margaret Thatcher, I mean, I read this and I read his autobiography, called him a terrorist as well because of the resistance to British interests in South Africa. So this is a general theme that we pick up, where when we're told who's a terrorist, they're a terrorist. So Hamas are terrorists because they don't treat their people well, and Hamas are terrorists because they throw rockets. So then by that notion, Israel also commits violence, and the Palestinians that live in, Israel are actually Israeli citizens, but they're not treated as equal. I was just going through the list while you were talking of the UN resolutions, and they clearly say they're not treated as equal citizens, and the United Nations says that they should have a right to self-determination. So then I think when we use these terms, and we're told to use these terms, that this organization's terrorists, I'm just calling out the hypocrisy of it. I'm not condoning Hamas or Hezbollah or anybody else. I don't condone the IOF either, by the way, but I'm just calling out the hypocrisy of it.
Let me go to John. John.
But can I jump here quickly?
It's just I want to balance it. So Khalees,
Sure.
kind of be a spot. I just want to go to somebody who's pro-Israel, then I'll come back to you. So John, go ahead.
I mean, I wouldn't necessarily call myself pro-Israel, but I mean, I'd say I lean more towards the center. But as somebody who's more so a bystander, I'm from America. I guess my idea is, and I've only just started to hear it said in this probably maybe what is this, the third space on this issue now, at least as of recently. It's just recently I'm hearing people start to talk about the idea that when you have two extremes of either side of the spectrum trying to debate each other, or not even just debate, come to find a consensus on anything, you're not going to find it, right? Because they're two extremes, like hot and boiling. It's like hot boiling water versus cold water. They're not going to just mix very well, or like oil and water even better. But I think people have made the great points of saying that if you have the people who are lean more towards center, which generally tends to be, the majority or a large portion of any given population in any side of a conflict, that's where you're gonna find a consensus. And I think people keep arguing things like, all right, so who's wrong? And I think you're arguing it on a moral level, but there's wrongs that have been done as far back as you go in the history. Depending who's where you put the blame on. And I guess my question is, at what point do you kind of who and I don't want to say who does it first, because then that kind of goes more into the blame game, but like at what point do both sides have to make a concerted effort to understand that there's been egregious breaches of all types of laws and just moral laws as well? But like, you got to move forward at some point. And my question is, when do you guys think that's going to happen? Or do you even want that to happen? Do you even want to have some type of dialogue? Or is it kind of just a never ending cycle of what we've been seeing? And I will admit, the guilt, that large actors, large countries, superpowers have on this conflict, whether it's the United States, China, Russia, and I think, that's a kind of another separate conversation, I would say, like the foreign influence aspect. But I guess my question is, at what point do you just stop? And I'm sorry for being long-winded, and just kind of move forward, or is that really what is the goal here? And
yeah, I'll go to Mohammed, then I'm going to go to Peter, and then I'll go to Sami. So go ahead, Mohammed.
Sure. So to build up on the point of elections and Hamas and choosing them, Well, I can go back in 2006 of why Palestinians chose them, and that's, I think, a fallacy, because they won a very slim majority, but they won the majority for three reasons. One was institutional, the way that the elections were structured. The internal Palestinian electoral system allowed them to gain more seats, no matter how, or despite having not as many votes. It's the same as the US to some extent in terms of having the plurality of votes versus more seats in different cities and districts. So that was institutional. There were two other reasons. One that is secondary, and there's the main one. The secondary one, according to President Bill Clinton, he said that it was the stupidity of Fatah. They ran on two slates. The movement splintered. At some point, they even splintered into three. So that weakened their competitiveness in that electoral cycle. But the main reason back then, and I remember it vividly, was Israel's unilateral withdrawal from Gaza for two reasons. Number one, the withdrawal was unilateral, not coordinated with the PA, and not announced as part of the peace process, which allowed Hamas to hang billboards and banners and signs in the streets saying that it was our resistance that liberated Gaza, not the failed negotiations, not the futile peace talks. And back then you had the advisor of Ariel Sharon, Dov Westglass, who told, he said it in a public conference, it was covered by the newspaper Haaretz. He said the purpose of the disengagement is to freeze the peace process and prevent Palestinian statehood and take the question of refugees off the table. These were the literal things he said. So that was number one, giving Hamas ammunition to claim it as a victory of its armed resistance. Number two was more socioeconomic. When Israel withdrew from Gaza, Ariel Sharon said that this withdrawal would mean cutting Gaza off from Israel, which meant cutting the entire labor force. It didn't mean cutting Israel's control over Gaza, because Israel controls Gaza's airspace, naval space, and ground space. But it meant cutting Gaza's labor force from Israel overnight, which back then led to, I would quote Sarah Roy, the Harvard University Jewish professor, daughter of Holocaust survivors, who said that this led to the worst economic depression in modern history. That was the verbatim quote she said. And that was according to data from the World Bank. So that depression that was caused overnight by the withdrawal and cutting Gaza's labor force from Israel, it created this massive economic problem in Gaza, massive poverty and unemployment that was coupled with the dysfunctionality of the Palestinian Authority and issues of corruption. Hamas back then, they did not run a campaign on destroying Israel. They didn't run a campaign on anything that had to do with the conflict. They ran a campaign on two promises: ending corruption and improving the economic situation. Their campaign slogan was change and reform. And that's how they won the minds and hearts of the people that voted for them. Change and reform. I remember Hania going from one home to the other saying that if we get elected, we will reduce massively the prices of basic commodities that your life depends on for basic subsistence. He would say that if I get elected, I'm not going to have an office or a giant entourage like those corrupt PA officials. My office is going to be the mosque. I'm going to be accessible to everyone. Now, of course, he reneged on these promises, but that's a different story. So they got elected based on socioeconomic promises because of the dire situation that this disengagement led to and that the occupation led to. Which reminds me of the United Nations recent estimate that the occupation have cost Palestinians over the last 2 decades in the West Bank about $50 billion in 2 decades. In Gaza, the blockade has cost Gaza's economy about $17 billion. So that's a huge reason of having this economic instability.
Mohammed, so if you want to summarize your point in 30 seconds, because then I want to move it on.
Yes. Yep. So I would say if you're upset with Hamas or the PA, the answer to that is holding Palestinian elections. And we fought for that very hard a couple of years ago, but it collapsed for two reasons. There was not enough support for it from the US or the EU. It was merely rhetorical. And the second problem was Israel stood in the way. The head of the Israeli internal security force, the Shin Bet, Nadav Arguman, he went to Abu Mazen and he said, you cannot have elections, there's a chance of Hamas winning. And Israel denied holding elections in East Jerusalem, occupied East Jerusalem, which led to the elections collapsing. Back then, Hamas and Fatah were both equally terrified. I know that intimate knowledge, because their own internal pollings were showing that they would win each about 20 to 25% of the popular vote. So if you're upset with either, pushing for elections is a way, and impeding it is contributing to whatever you criticize of the Palestinian leadership.
Peter, go ahead.
Yeah, well, again, so much going on in the room. I think that, I want to weigh on what John pointed out, and I think the prospect of conflict resolution here is we need to make change the discourse around, specifically around issues of trust. And until we can get to that place, then we're going to continue to see hostilities, conflict, and war. This space is called Israeli strikes in Lebanon and Gaza after Hamas rockets, and I joined a bit late, so I didn't hear really much talk about Lebanon. And the situation that deteriorated yesterday was a result of what happened in Jerusalem at Al-Aqsa, but also because of these voids of control, these vacuums of control, which permit people to launch rockets out of Lebanon into Israel, potentially shifting the entire region into a war like we've not seen before. So we've been through several rounds of conflict and war in Gaza, but anybody that understands the situation here in the Middle East knows that conflict with Hezbollah in Lebanon and Israel is a whole different ballgame for both sides. And I think that this is something that needs to be addressed on an international level. So if you have a terrorist organization like Hezbollah that is effectively holding a country hostage, is that the type of stability we want in the region? If Hamas is a similar organization and is holding the people of Gaza hostage, is that the type of stability we want here? And from our side, when Israel is looking at it, and I think what we can, what at least the way I feel from my experience serving for many years in the IDF in the military.
Peter, quick question, sure. And then you can just carry on. Sure. Apologies. Isn't Hezbollah, are we talking about Hezbollah in Lebanon? Are they not democratically elected?
I think they have political organizations and control in much of in the parliament as well.
Yeah, they have them. They were a lot of Hezbollah members, because in the Lebanese parliament were democratically elected. Correct.
But that doesn't change the situation. If this is a terrorist organization and their coalition system in Lebanon means that ultimately they have control, does Israel need to sit on its hands and hope that they don't launch 140,000 rockets and missiles that they have pointed at us now? And what happened yesterday was the potential where the anxiety was that are we on the brink of conflict? The amount of phone calls I had from friends or from work colleagues that were that called me up. She said, "I'm on the way up north. Do you think I should continue or should I turn around? Where is this going?" And I think this is the situation. This is the core element of perhaps Israel's insecurity and Israel's need to be a strong player from a military perspective in this very volatile area, and it's part of our insecurity on one hand and the need for security on the other hand. With regard to what Mohammed was saying about Hamas in Gaza and elections, And if we had elections today, there is a distinct chance that Hamas would win in the West Bank as well. And what would that mean for the security in the region? I know when Hamas originally took control and was elected in 2006, I was serving 2005, 2006. I was serving in the West, in the Gaza, on the border with Gaza, at Erez Crossing. The crossing there was being rebuilt after the disengagement, after Israel left the Gaza Strip.
So Peter, if you could just summarize your point in 30 seconds.
30 seconds. Hamas, if they take control over the West Bank, it will not lead to a more secure situation, but rather to more insecurity. Sorry.
Suleiman, can I just say something here?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to jump in really quickly because look, all right. So this is the thing. When we talk about like Hamas and or Palestinians and the terrorism and what they're doing and their rockets and their stone throwing. I mean, you won't believe. I mean, on this space it's been quite good, but usually the stone throwing, you think it was the biggest act of terror. The complaining I've heard about that. I mean, the Israeli government actually lists stone throwing as an act of terror officially. So when we put this into context of why the Palestinians are doing this, the United Nations have actually given the right to the Palestinians for self-determination. They have classed them as occupied people, and they have said that they have the right to defend themselves. And if that means a violent defense, then they're allowed to do that by the United Nations resolutions that have been issued. So when we call them out, we should then, and I'm not agreeing, I mean, you know, for me, I just want violence to stop in that region completely. From both sides. And I say from both sides. I want everybody, I know there are people terrified across the board. Religion doesn't matter. All the human beings that live there, no matter which side they're on, they are terrified, and especially at this moment in time, and they want to live in peace and they want a bit of peace. So I want to table that first. I'm not condoning this. But what I'm saying is when you occupy people, and these are the words of the United Nations, I've got the resolution here, I can read it out, but I don't want to bore people to death. By all means, Google it. And the United Nations says that Palestinians have a right to self-determination. They are the occupied people, and they have the right to resist. And if that, and they actually initially said resist, but then they updated the resolution and said and resist with violence if necessary. So what are we saying here? That we take away their right to resist and then we carry on doing what we want to do, bombing them, killing them, treating them like they're subhuman, terrorizing them every day of their lives. You know, the way that children are treated by the IOF soldiers, I see footage after footage after footage. It's disgraceful. You know, in the UK, you have an age limit, okay, above which you're treated as an adult criminal, and an age limit under which you're treated as a minor. That doesn't apply for Palestinians. I've seen them treat a 5-year-old as though he was a 60-year-old man, muscly man. The way they pick up children, throw them around, guns in their faces. It's awful. It's terrible. And it has to be called out.
So I want to give it to Benjamin and then I'll come to you, Sammy, just to get balance. Go for it.
Yeah, so I just want to point out that same UN resolution in which you are referring to they're allowed to defend themselves with violence, that resolution specifically says against military targets. And that's not generally what we see. So that's just an important...
So which resolution are you looking at, Benjamin? Because you don't know, I didn't name the resolution I was looking at. So why didn't you tell me first?
Well, because I'm familiar with one. I don't know the resolution number off by head.
But then how do you know which one I'm looking at? Because there are 60. There are over 60 resolutions.
Can you please then post in the Jumbotron the actual wording of the text where it says that the UN sanctioned Palestinians?
I will. Give me 1 second and I will do it. I just have somebody
against civilians.
Yeah,
yeah, thank you. I think it's also important to note that, look, Hamas is not this backwards Taliban-like organization, right? These are not just mountain people. They are a very sophisticated it's a very sophisticated network, right? Yes, they do. I'm not going to be a hypocrite or try to, be with my eyes closed. Yes, they do a lot of humanitarian work in Gaza. That is a fact, right? They run a lot of hospitals. I mean, yes, they're a terrorist organization in my view, but we have to be honest and objective here. But keep in mind, though, they're very calculating, right? Their primary objective is self-preservation and power. It is not, in my opinion, the freedom of Palestine. And I don't think anything would be more showing to that fact that if you remember the Hudna, the ceasefire, and I believe it was 2002, where Nabil Sha'ath entered in negotiations with Israel for a bilateral ceasefire, and in order to get Hamas to agree to it, Nabil Sha'ath brought a guarantee on the leadership of Hamas's life from the Saudis, and they agreed to it. So the self-preservation is going to be, it's primary in their mind, right? They want the money, they want the power, and they want control. I don't think anyone would argue with that. And to the point about the unilateral Gaza withdrawal, so it's important to note that, even Terry Rhodes Larson from the UN and the EU, who is not a supporter of Israel, he even opined numerous times after that. And the exact wording was, it is a shame because the Palestinians could have turned Gaza into a Singapore or a Malaysia rather than, use the money. More money had come into Gaza since the unilateral withdrawal than has ever come from the United States to Israel in totality. If you add up all the aid in a total, right? So just to be objective here, right? We can't just say that, the unilateral withdrawal from Gaza did this and that. No, at the end of the day, the withdrawal from Gaza was complete, and I have not seen any, and I could be wrong, I don't frequent Gaza, but I have not seen any attempt by Hamas to build Gaza into a flourishing society. And you can't say because it's lack of funding, because they've got tens of billions, if not hundreds of billions of dollars from the international community, and it's worse off now than it ever was. And that is, you can say, well, the Israeli blockade, the Egyptian blockade, listen, the money still gets in there, right? So instead of building schools and hospitals and communities in the areas where the settlements were, the settlements were, you don't see new, vibrant, flourishing communities. You see terror launching bases. So we have to be honest about that, right? When you have hundreds of billions of dollars and you choose not to use that money to support the community, to build a thriving, flourishing, beautiful place for the people, you can't only blame, it's the occupation, even Salim Jubril, the former Supreme Court Justice, he opined, and he was an Israeli Arab. He opined, he goes, listen, yes, I have a lot of criticisms of the Israeli government, but at the same time, I have a lot of criticisms of the Palestinian leadership and Hamas too. So.
I want to go to Mohammed because I know you want to respond specifically to that, and then I'll come to you, Sami, in a minute.
Sure. Well, going into the details of that, I can start by the statements of Israel's Defense Minister Benny Gantz, the last one, who said on more than 3 occasions, and I quote verbatim, "We will not allow any real development in Gaza." Again, Israel's Defense Minister, "We will not allow any real development in Gaza."
How long has he been Defense Minister for, though?
He was the Defense Minister for 2 years. Before that, I can quote every single Defense Minister by heart. I know these statements by heart. Yes, Gaza is very personal. Yes. Then you had
billions and billions and billions. Well, billions and billions and billions of dollars have gone.
But I listened to you. Now my turn. So Avigdor Lieberman saying that our policy in Eretz Shiva, in a long interview, saying our policy in Gaza is clear. We keep their heads above the water, their bodies drowned, and nothing more. So they keep their bodies drowned, their heads above the water, just to catch a breath, but not to die, but not allowed to live. That was Lieberman's quote. So you have the same consistent policy under Ehud Barak, and I know personally Ephraim Sneh, who was the Deputy Minister of Defense when the blockade was instituted. I can quote every single one of them at length, Barak, Lieberman, Bennett, etc. And you have this consistent policy of not allowing any real development in Gaza. And to expand on that, if you take the example of the greenhouses that Israel left in Gaza to turn it into Singapore, whatever, these were about, I think, if I remember the figure correctly, about $30 million worth of greenhouses that were left by an Australian philanthropist. And then he himself, a Jewish Australian philanthropist, he himself said that the greenhouses were dismantled not as a rejection, but in the process of post-evacuation looting from all the poor people that went there. I went to the settlements when they were evacuated. Most of the housing units were dismantled and taken to Israel. There was almost nothing left. What was there was basically, I remember I found a pair of eyeglasses. Another person found a toilet. There was a couple of buildings here and there. And one of these buildings have been turned into a flourishing university. Another settlement area has been turned into a ginormous resort and park. Asda. There are a lot of projects in these areas. But what is preventing and stifling Gaza's potential is, and I know that you would be irritated by this, but Israel's blockade. You cannot, it's easier in Gaza to smuggle weapons from Egypt, although that has now been closed down with Egypt flooding all the tunnels with raw seawater. But it was easier to get smuggle weapons from Egypt than legally import chocolate through Israel. So that, and on the other hand, it was near impossible to export a single commodity from Gaza. The Dutch Prime Minister of the Netherlands in 2013, they donated scanning machines to the Karni commercial crossing with Gaza so that Israel would use it to facilitate and expedite the entry of commodities in and out. And he was asked to attend the opening of it, commencing this humanitarian project. And in protest, he refused. The reason, it was stated clearly in Haaretz, is because Israel refused to use these scanning machines to allow Gazan exports to Israel, the West Bank, and Europe. Nothing goes out of Gaza. Gaza was very famous for exporting strawberries, furniture, flowers to Europe, to the West Bank, and to the rest of the world. Nothing is allowed to be exported. Imports were restricted to absolute humanitarian necessities. Now this is fluctuating up and down. It goes up and down. But at the moment, it's near impossible, for example, to import construction materials to build hospitals, as you said, or to build a flourishing city. There are a lot of studies from the United Nations, from Israel, from whatever entity you may recall, that point out the very excruciating, slow process of Gaza's reconstruction, mainly, if not solely, due to Israel's restrictions and the entry of construction material into Gaza. And in that sense, so no exports allowed, heavy restrictions on the entry of products. The other dimension to it is cutting Gaza from the international economic system. You cannot have a McDonald's or KFC or whatever because you cannot import the necessities for it on a regular basis. And then the last dimension is not allowing anyone into Gaza aside from humanitarian workers in internationally recognized organizations or accredited journalists. No one can go into Gaza for tourism, for family visits, for whatever reason you may, investments, whatever you may recall. Israel is now facing this sort of economic threat out of the threat of people taking their money out, divesting, withdrawing businesses, investments, which poses a very credible threat to its economy, if not survival. That's what the headlines are saying. Gaza is not allowed to have any of that. You cannot have any foreign direct investments into Gaza. So a flourishing potential for a flourishing Singapore, I would say that's nonsense from the start. And the policy, the problem, and I will conclude here, and sorry for taking too long time, the problem with Israel's policy in Gaza, according to Israeli experts, is there's no end game there. What is the end game of the blockade? What do you aim to achieve? In the beginning, it was to weaken Hamas. It was designed as a tactic of economic warfare to weaken Hamas. But ever since that didn't work, Israel has not had any end game to it or an idea of the end game. What would be the outcome that you hope to achieve out of this, other than managing the conflict? And the other dimension is that there's no, and I challenge anyone in this chat, there's not a single Israeli politician that would dare to say we should remove the blockade from Gaza, not a mainstream Israeli Jewish politician, from the left or the right. No one would dare to say it because they will be seen as khnoon, as weak, as capitulating to terrorism and surrendering to the enemy and whatever. So Israel, in that sense, climbed on a tree that it cannot climb down from. That Israel's government at the moment, and it's very shameful in that sense, that it would rather send suitcases filled with cash notes from Qatar into Gaza in cartoon money bags with dollar signs on the side, rather than allow Gaza a true chance to have its own economy. And in Gaza, we refer to these as sedatives, painkillers.
So Mohammed, if you just want to wrap up in 30 seconds.
Yes, I wrap up here. We refer to these as bandages, painkillers, and sedatives. We say, okay, there comes another dose of sedatives. If it's the Qatari cash infusions or the international humanitarian aid, and all of it, at the end of the day, we see it as something that is to pacify and prolong the status quo rather than solve anything. But we accept it because it keeps life going to a minimum extent. If you take it away, what you have is chaos.
Right, let me go to Sami, because you've had your hand up for a while, and then I'm going to go to Peter. Sami.
Thanks very much, Suleiman. Thanks for having me on. I think that lives has been taking place in the group, listening to some of the presentations. I think it's important to put some of them into context, because when you listen to them out of context, they sound wonderful. So I think it's worth to put this into a bit of context, which is that if you picture yourself having a home and somebody turns up, turfs you out of that home, puts a gun to your head, and then you try to seek international help to get your home back. International community says, we like the guys who took your home better than we like you. And then that person from inside your own home looks out at you at the window and says, I want to live side by side with you. He says, I want to have dialogue. I want to be able to sit in a cafe and drink coffee with you. You sitting outside, you say, but I want my home back before we have our coffee. He says, no, I don't want you to come take the home. I want you to move on. When will you move on from your home? When will you move on from your land? When will you move on from this situation in which I now occupy this land that you once lived on? I occupy this land that your family lived on. I didn't want to live side by side with you. I wanted to occupy it, and I want you now to go hundreds of miles away to go set up your own state over there. When somebody asked earlier, at what point does everybody say enough is enough and let's move forward? To put that question into context, the question is, at what point does a Palestinian turn around and say, look, I don't want to go to my home anymore. You can keep my home. You can keep my land. You can keep everything that you've taken from me, and I'm going to go set up somewhere else. That's the question you're asking. You're asking at what point does a Palestinian turn around and say, you know what, forget it. He kicked me out my home. It looks like he's keeping it. I'll go somewhere else. That's the context of the dialogue and peace that is being advocated here. I'm not saying that those saying it are insincere. They are sincere in what they say, but perhaps naive in the context of what they're asking. And this is the essence of the issue, in that a lot of talk has been about Hamas. A lot of talk has been about Gaza. A lot of talk has been about rockets or the like. But you have to remember that Palestinians are walking past houses every day that they were kicked out of. They are walking past houses where their families lived and where they were violently kicked out from. What's happening in these spaces, and I applaud these spaces that bring these people together, is that what we're hearing is very eloquent language of dialogue and living together. But in context, what you're actually saying to the Palestinian is, yes, you're walking past your home, but get over it. Move on. Go somewhere else. We're here to stay. We're not going anywhere. And this goes against every principle of justice in Judaism, in Islam, in Christianity, in the basic human essence of nature, human justice. That's the crux of the issue. When Peter earlier is talking about Israel's security, Israel feels insecure. Israel does not feel insecure because of the rocket attacks or because of Hamas. Israel feels insecure because it is yet to find a way to get the Palestinians to swallow the fact that they've been kicked out of their land. Israel is trying to get the Palestinians to essentially resign themselves that they will not get their land or their homes back. And this is what the two-state solution is all about. The two-state solution sounds wonderful. A state for the Jewish population, a state for the Palestinian population living side by side. It sounds wonderful when you talk about it in abstract, but in its context, what it means is this. The two-state solution is a discussion of how much land or what families, which Palestinian families should we force to accept that they're never going to get their homes back? How many families should we put on the list to say they will never get their land back because it was forcibly taken? In other words, the two-state solution is a discussion about how much injustice should we accept, and they leave the rest for another day. And that's why the two-state solution, this is why Israel rejects the one-state solution, because the one-state solution means that everybody lives together. It means a democracy of equal rights, which means that the Palestinians have equal access to their rights, and justice dictates that the Palestinians are restored to their land and restored to their homes, and the population that ousted them have to find an alternative through which to build their own homes, or indeed to buy land, or indeed to try to find a way to coexist. And that's why Israel rejects it. So the point that I want to make is this: listening to the discussion in this group, the words are wonderful, they are colorful, they are poetic, they are excellent. Anybody listening in this group, amongst the thousands listening in this space, will think this is so sad that these people keep fighting. But the point of the matter is that the reality is, those who are listening, is it's important to put it into context. I, as an Algerian, I'm old enough to have lived to see my grandfather. I saw the crimes that France committed. I saw my great aunt with her breast chopped off. I saw the torture, horseshoe marks burnt into my grandfather's body and the like. And I saw the hatred in their eyes. But when you read about the colonization of the French of Algeria, there was a period in the 1930s and 40s where discussions were like this: at what point will Algerians move on? At what point can we talk about citizenship? At what point can we talk about equal rights? The reality is the French never provided that. And when we look at Israel today, the language sounds wonderful, let's all live together. But anybody opening a map from 1948 until now will see that Israel continues to expand. We'll see Netanyahu in January saying, I'm going to annex the West Bank. We'll see raids in Jenin. We'll see Biden pleading with Netanyahu, please don't annex the West Bank. We'll see Palestinians bracing themselves for a storming of the Israeli army, knowing that the Israelis are burning the villages like Hawara in a bid to try to drive the Palestinians further in order to continue expanding their borders. On the one hand, you want to live side by side with me. On the other hand, you're taking more and more of my land. On the one hand, you talk about a figure in your life who was an Arab where you sat and had coffee with him. On the other side, you took his land and you took his house. And that's why what I worry about, and I'll finish on this point because I don't want to take too long, I know many people have points to say, is that behind the lovely words, behind the eloquence, in abstract, it sounds lovely. In context, it's horrific. To say to a Palestinian, at what point can we move on and do conflict resolution, is to say to the Palestinian, I kicked you out of your home, I kicked you out of your land, you have no power to get it back, nobody will help you get it back, no international community will come to your rescue, live with it, swallow it, there's a land 100 miles away, go make your state over there, and everybody claps because all they hear is, let's live together side by side. There is an Arabic saying, it's haqqun urida bihi batil, which is when you say something which is true, the idea that we should have dialogue and live together, but you call for it in order to justify a grave injustice, in order to justify something that is outrageous. And this is why I think it should be put into context. There's a lot, and I promise Suleiman, this last minute or less than a minute. The point here is this, in that when you're looking at the context of Palestine and Israel, you can focus on Hamas, you can focus on the rockets, you can focus on Israeli security. But the reason Israel's security is under threat is because it turfed 2 million Palestinians from their homes and lands. And these Palestinians are so aggrieved, they are so desperate to take their homes and their lands back. They want their justice to be given to them as any reasonable human being would. But the reality is they lack the power to do so at this moment in time. And now there are spaces like this, which I applaud, and that they're bringing dialogue, but there are spaces where people are now trying to talk about recognizing that injustice with the language of let's all live together and have dialogue. I caution everybody here, this is the final sentence, I caution everybody in this group that when you hear the language of let's all live together, put it in context. Somebody is sitting in a home that they stole, looking out of the window at the family they kicked out and saying, yo, I took your home, let's talk, let's have dialogue, go build your house somewhere else. No one in this group would accept it. No one in this space would accept it. So beware the colorful language, because behind it is an outrageous reality that no one would accept.
Right. I just want to say one quick thing, Suleiman. So, Sami, you're a very eloquent speaker, and listen, I applaud everything you said. But at the end of the day, those are the facts. That is the reality on the ground. I mean, we can only deal with the reality, right? So, there, in my mind, and I may be wrong, I mean, what else is there to do talk about the two-state solution, right? The idea that Israel is going to pack up and leave, and this what people view as a wrong is going to be righted. That's just not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. I think you would agree with that in the privacy of your own mind. And it's not new. Keep in mind, it's not new. This is not the only time in history that things like this have happened, right? You're from Algeria. I had a grandparent from Algeria, and the exact same thing happened. They were thrown out of Algeria and their land was taken, and guess where they went? To Israel. Their only crime was being a Jew. So, you're a very good speaker. And again, I respect you a lot, but we have to be honest, right? We cannot say, well, let's just spend 100 years talking about past grievances. And those are the facts, right? So we can only deal with what is possible. The idea that Israel is going to pack up and go build homes somewhere else, you would like that, but it's not going to happen. It's just not going to happen. On the other side of my family, I know that we're not going to be able to go back to Poland or to what is now the Czech Republic or to Romania and reclaim our homes. It's not. That's just not realistic, right? When they were sent to the concentration camps, and I'm not using the Holocaust as an excuse. What I'm saying though is those are the realities of the ground. So I don't know what else there is to do to talk aside from talk about hopefully finding some kind of a solution to this, because the idea that millions of Israelis are going to just pack up and leave. There's second, third, fourth generation Israelis there now. It's just not going to happen. So you can make all your talking points about international law and outrage and everything, but let's focus on what can be done, not what we would like to be done.
Can I address that point, Suleiman?
Yeah, go ahead.
So the point is, of course. So addressing that particular point, they're not going anywhere. Nothing's going to happen or the like. The Arabs have a saying, "Al-hal la yadum," a status quo never lasts. And that was the case with Algeria with 132 years. The reality is that once France looked invincible and they went. The Arab Spring, Ben Ali in Tunisia looked invincible and he went. The thing is, but the point here is, sorry, just to finish on this point.
Yeah, but it's different.
Just to finish on this point.
Algeria did not have nuclear weapons.
That's fine. Just let me finish on this. My point here is not that the Israelis should pack up and leave. That's not the issue at all. And in fact, when I'm looking at the situation in Israel at the moment, the reality is it's now very markedly different. In May 2021, Israel finally lost its monopoly on the narrative. The breaking of its monopoly on this narrative that it's the victim was suddenly broken. We saw unprecedented language used in Congress, finally apartheid regime being accurately used to describe it. And we're actually seeing more Israelis becoming very much aware of the reality on which Israel is built on. I do think that there is a change in mentality, and I think that in itself can lend itself to this one-state solution in which they can live side by side. I do think attitudes are changing. My point is not necessarily that at the end of the day, these two communities are destined to fight each other. My point is that the current approach of trying to legitimize the current status quo will not bring about the stability that they seek. What's happening in Israel is that there is a growing generation that is beginning to reflect that Israel is built on a very ugly foundation. We're seeing now congressmen and congresswomen who don't want to meet Netanyahu, who don't want to meet his ministers. We're beginning to see these changing attitudes. And the final point,
America is built on an ugly foundation. The hypocrisy of it. I'm sorry, America is built on slavery, built on colonization. Before they start talking about Israeli and Israeli politics, why don't they go address the First Nations, the indigenous people? They can't even get a reparations act passed in Congress. 2/3 of Congress are against, basically providing reparations to people who they enslaved. But they're going to comment on the Israeli policy, the hypocrisy. It's all shuttleboard diplomacy.
If I can just finish this particular point, which is even when you bring about the US is a good example of what can happen in Israel. This is my point, in that it's not about looking backwards, it's looking forwards. The idea of Israel trying to preserve its state as an ethnocentric exclusive state. We saw it was built on colonization, but eventually now we have rights secured for many of their various different minorities, and we have growing equal opportunities. It's not perfect, but it's changed significantly since. And I think Israel will change significantly. The mentality will change significantly because there's a new generation who are no longer victims of the monopolization of the narrative. Social media has broken that. And I think that the new generation will be able to find the solutions that the old generation could not find. What that means is a new generation will be able to identify where the transgressions were and actually move beyond it, in the same way that the UK today has an Indian Prime Minister and Scotland has a Pakistani First Minister, and the US you had Barack Obama or the like. I do think things that today Israelis would find absolutely outrageous, I think that given a couple of generations, I do think it will change. I think the trajectory is going towards somewhere in which Israel will no longer be able to expand in the way that it's expanding. And I think it will go through an identity crisis eventually when a generation arises that asks itself, hang on a second, we're living on land that we stole, we're living on land that does not legitimately belong to us, there's refugee camps everywhere all around us. How can we reincorporate, redesign the state in which it incorporates them and guarantees them their right? I believe that's the way the course of history goes. But the point that I wanted to make was not about what the solution should be or the like. My point was that behind the eloquent rhetoric that we're hearing today in terms of let's talk and move beyond, all I wanted to ask was that those in this space to appreciate what lies behind the reality that lies behind those words, what the actual message of those words are, because those messages are dark, they are outrageous, they are unacceptable. And I think that instead the language should be one of recognizing that this is a very dark dilemma that we have. Course, not in the international courts or the international community, all power, all the like. Ask yourselves, if you are in that position, what would be your recourse? What would you do? Would you sit forever in the refugee camps, or would you try to restore what was rightfully yours? I'm not justifying the actions of Hamas or the like, but I'm saying that behind the eloquent rhetoric, behind the grandiose words that are being used to describe that we should live together or the like, behind it lies a very real reality that if everybody takes a step back and looks at the bigger picture, they will see that the grandiose words don't actually sound so grandiose anymore. They don't sound as rosy anymore. And in fact, they sound vicious and they sound dark. In my opinion, to finish on this point, in my opinion, the only solution to the Palestine-Israel conflict is a one-state solution, equal rights to all, a democratic system. The only reason Israel rejects it is because it fears that the Jewish population will no longer be the majority. They don't want Palestinians involved in the decision and policy making of their state. That's the reality of it. And in that lies, you can call it whatever you want. I'll avoid labeling what that attitude is. But that's the reality. There can only be a one-state solution, because in a one-state solution, you can provide recourse to justice, redress with regards to lands, and it's not about kicking Israelis out. No one is saying kick the Israelis out. What people are saying is, let's live side by side, but in the principle of justice, not in the principle of theft and trying to legitimize that theft under the prospect of a two-state solution. Apologies for taking everybody's time. I hope that's a bit clearer.
Raphael, I'm going to let you comment on that. And before you do, just a question. So in terms of one-state solution, why is it that are you vehemently against it, or what's your thoughts about it, Raphael? Raphael, you just need to unmute your mic on the bottom left. Okay.
Hey, Raphael, I don't know. Can you hear Suleiman?
Can I speak?
Sorry, Suleiman, can I just respond to what Benjamin asked me? I had somebody at the door. I was looking at the resolution.
I'll come to you in a second, Alicia. I just want, because Sammy did speak for a while, I want Raphael to get a response. If Raphael's not there, which seems like he's not, I'm going to give Peter a chance to respond, and then I'll come to you.
Yeah, okay. So I think what Sammy was talking about is probably, in its best case, wishful thinking, definitely where we are today, 2023. And if he's looking forward to several generations, my problem with that is how much more death and destruction and conflict and wars do we have to go? The premise of the Oslo Agreement was separation of two states, of one living side by side, so that there can be a Jewish state for the Jewish people, not only the Jewish people, but there can be a place where Jews can call home in their historic homeland. And that is why it is such an unpopular, the notion of a one-state solution is such an unpopular talking point here in the vast majority of Israel. If he's right, along in generations to come, that may be the outcome, I honestly don't know, and I don't think that I have the ability to be a prophet in that respect. My background as a military man, and today where I sit is practical solutions for practical problems, And unfortunately, the talk and the discussion of a one-state solution does not bring anyone in Israel closer to understanding the situation and the complexities of the reality here on the ground, because nobody sees that potentially happening. And everybody is suspicious about what are the true intentions of Palestinian propagators of this idea. So that for me is probably what I could say about that. I think that there's. I'm still watching this. What's going on here?
Peter,
Yes,
Peter,
yes,
just a quick question:
sure.
is the reason why a one-state solution isn't possible because essentially the Arabs will be the majority?
Well, essentially, minorities in the Middle East don't do too good. So I think that is a sticking point. Yes, absolutely. We came, the State of Israel was established in 1948 out of the promise that there would be a place for Jews to call home. And that is what the whole Zionist project is all about. Why should we end that dream that after it was realized, and 75 years on today, it's not perfect? And as I said earlier in my comments, that I have problems with my own government, and I protest that. But we're looking forward to the next 75 years of how we can improve, but not only how we can improve, but what is our vision for the future of the State of Israel? What does that mean, and what is its contribution to society and to the global community as well, and to the world? And sure, there are still questions about how we are moving our country forward, and there are problems of identity today. But the part of the conflict with the Palestinians is a sticking point, and I believe, and in my opinion, the only way to bridge that is to have a negotiated agreement between two sides, and we need leadership, we need education, as I said earlier, so that we can reach perhaps that. It's very hard talking
Peter,
about it.
Can I ask you another question? Because you're really explaining things in a brilliant manner.
Thank you.
What in your view, what would be the solution?
The only solution is a two-state solution. I mean, Israel.
Yeah, I'm assuming you're gonna want a two-state solution, but how would that look in your mind?
Well, it would be a separation. There would be settlements or land exchanges between the two parties. There would have to be a transition period that maintains and secures Israel's security concerns. We can't have the threat of rockets from the mountain range of the West Bank, which overlooks 70% of Israel's population, 80% of our economy, from Haifa down to Ashdod and Ashkelon. If you have the threat of rockets that we have from Gaza, then they could just pick us off one by one. So that the sense of security needs to be ensured. There are security mechanisms, technology, and a process that could eventually fulfill that. But anywhere that Israel leaves, whether it's Israel has conducted redeployment from Gaza. They took 6,000 civilians out of the Gaza Strip. And I agree with what Mohammed said earlier today, that could have been done in a way which would have empowered the peace process, but it wasn't. But Israel left Lebanon, Israel's left Egypt for peace, the Sinai Peninsula. So there are, it has happened in the past. Today, it's a non-starter. It's not an issue that can be talked about in Israel. But I would say in the main discourse of society, but that is, in my opinion, that is the only solution for the conflict. A one-state solution would mean that Israel would be the Jews in this area would be a minority, and as I said, minorities in this region don't do too good, and that would be a catastrophe in my opinion. And so far. So, I definitely stand on the shoulders of the former Prime Minister Ehud Barak, who saw that and sees that still to today. as, you know, this two-state solution as the only state solution that will ensure a Jewish state of Israel, and a place Jews can call home, and be safe.
Wrap up in 20 seconds. Yeah. Thank you for that. I want to go to Patrick. Patrick, I always love your
Suleiman, I mean, I can I speak right now? Sorry, I was a little bit busy.
I heard, but what I'm doing is going to I'm just balancing it out. So Peter took your position, but
okay, yeah, no problem. Yeah, cool.
Straight after Patrick, I'm going to go to you, Raphael. So Patrick, I mean, I always love your takes. So what's your thoughts on this?
Actually, Raphael can go before me because I know you tried to get him before. So
Patrick, no, go ahead, Patrick, man. It's okay.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah, look, there's a lot of there's the reality on the ground, and there's the reality of, you know, one country is more powerful than the other. One country has more powerful allies than the other. And then there's the discourse. And let's, you know, it is what it is. And I agree with that. Of course, we have to. But the problem with this discussion is the corruption of the discourse, the intellectual corruption, the intellectual bankruptcy that people do, working around these various rationales, pretending that they're somehow acting morally. And if this continues for decades and decades, it's just toxic. And that's one of the reasons why we're here today. The two-state solution was it was an act of deception. It was a collusion between the United States and Israel to buy time to build settlements for 600,000 settlers, a complete sham. That's all it was. In not unlike the Minsk Accords, which was a complete sham that the West pretended to be the guarantor while they built up the Ukrainian military over a 7 or 8 year period. So let's be honest about what it is. And the two-state solution, of course, is not going to work for Israelis. So they're going to say, oh, it's unworkable. It's unworkable for Israelis. But that doesn't mean it's a one-state. The two-state solution is workable for Israelis. A one-state solution is not, and that's not a basis for rejecting a one-state solution. If you have negotiations, it takes two parties, and the problem is Israelis, Zionists, are not willing to give any ground at all, not willing to compromise. What their compromise is, and I'm going to use a crude metaphor, but if I have my boot on the neck of somebody who's on the ground and they're negotiating whether I can take my boot off their neck and let them breathe or keep it on and continue with the status quo, metaphorically, that's what you're doing. And there is no place in the 21st century for an ethno-nationalist state or an exclusive religious state. That's fine. You have a right to believe you want to right to a homeland, but if you're carving out your homeland at the expense of another people, this is morally wrong. This is wrong on a human level. It might be good for your tribe or your nation or however you envision yourself. But if you achieve something at the expense of another and keep them oppressed, tortured for 100 years or something like that, there's going to be ramifications for that. So I agree with Sammy that this would take, generations to fix, but eventually it will. Eventually it will. In much the same way that there will be a united Ireland probably at some point in the future, 10 or 20 or 30 years, as the old generation dies off. And, we make mistakes as humans. So what's a good idea in 1948 for the British and the Americans in establishing a state of Israel at the expense of the native Palestinians might seem like a good idea then. It might continue to be a good idea for another 50 or 60 or 80 or even 70 or 90, 100 years. But it's not going to be a good idea forever because it has consequences. And so, there's a home for Arabs, Muslims, Jews, Christians. There's homes all over the world for these people. They live in the United States. They live in Brazil. They live in Argentina. They live in Mexico. They live all around Europe. They live in Asia. They have an exclusive homeland. It's a great concept, But if you can't share it with your other fellow humans, then the price that you're asking others to pay for your exclusivity is going to have a backlash, and that backlash could be absolutely terminal, not just for the people living there who call it their homeland, but for everybody else who's also there in the vicinity. And that's what everybody wants to avoid. Therefore, you need to think about compromise. This is how the world works. Unless you believe that it's a Platonic world, it's a Hobbesian world, and only the strong survive, and might makes right, and that's the end of that. Fine, you're well within your rights. And Ben said something that is patently incorrect. He said that the United States wants to pass a reparations bill, and he says that they need to pass this reparations bill for the people who were enslaved. That bill is not for anybody who was enslaved. There's nobody alive today in the United States, African American, that was enslaved.
No, what I said. Quote me accurately.
Ben,
but you're being intellectually dishonest. But you're being intellectually dishonest. That's not what I said.
You're impolite. Be respectful.
But you're dishonest because that's not what I said.
Let me finish what I said. You're being disrespectful.
But you're being dishonest.
You'll get your chance to speak, Ben.
Well, then speak the truth. Don't inaccurately quote me.
You'll get your chance to speak. Is this how you do debates? Wait.
I call out lies when I hear them. Yeah, that's not what I said.
Call it out. Give me 30 seconds, please, Ben. Okay. Reparations. Nobody alive today was enslaved. You said that. You said for people that were reparations for people that are enslaved. The people who are enslaved are not quiet. You did say that. Play the recording when it's over.
Please do.
People that were enslaved many years ago, and the same with the Native Americans. The difference between slavery in America and the transgressions against Native Americans, all of which are regrettable parts of history, is that the Palestinian-Israeli issue is happening now. We can do something about it today. But one party does not want to do anything about it. In fact, they want to expand settlements. They want to expand their neo-colonial project. Okay, that's the difference, Ben. And reparations will break America. Reparations will be the bane of the United States if that goes forward. Untold havoc and political division will result from that. And I think anybody who's looked at that closely, including Thomas Sowell, one of the greatest living American scholars, has said as much. So I will land it there.
Yeah, Ben, yeah, thank you. Yeah, so there's a lot to unpack there. I'll be very brief. So at the end of the day, what I said was the United States cannot even pass a reparations bill. And they can't, right? So what you're saying is that in that specific case, a debt that is owed, which I believe that the descendants, the foundational Black Americans, which they feel that is a debt owed to them, is not a debt that has to be paid. So you're cherry picking. So you're putting temporal limits on when a person can claim reparations and when they can't. What you're saying is that, well, after this amount of time that, when people have died off, no, they're not entitled to reparations. But you're saying that that doesn't apply to Israel, right? So that's an interesting point that I just like to clarify with you, because I don't find that argument holds water. If we're going to have an intellectually honest conversation, don't you think that the topic of reparations should be front and center in United States domestic policy, right? Now, don't say that it's going to bankrupt the entire country, because listen, the funding of Ukraine, you could argue, is going to potentially bankrupt them, right? The war in Afghanistan. How much would reparations cost? There's estimates between $200 billion and $2 trillion. But because there's nobody alive today, does that mean that their descendants are not alive today? Are they not owed it? You're talking about these. Let me finish, please. You're talking about Palestine. So most of the people from 1948, very soon enough, the original generation that were displaced, they're going to be dead. So does that mean their descendants are, by your logic, they're not entitled to compensation either? Thank you. And my last point is this, again, you're talking about these doomsday scenarios and blah, blah, blah. I respect you, but I disagree with you, right? At the end of the day, people need to only deal with the available realities, right? And Sammy was mentioning something. He gave some beautiful, eloquent phrases in Arabic, right? I will give you a quote in Hebrew, which was not uttered by an Israeli. This was uttered by Mahmoud Abbas, the chairman of the Palestinian Authority, who said in Hebrew. Le'olam lo yachzaru b'ti Palestinaim lamedinat Israel. Pashut lo yakum v'lo yeh. What that means is this. The Palestinian refugees will never return to the state of Israel. That is his quote, okay? He has come to grips with the fact that whether or not it is right or wrong, it's just not going to happen. So even if the elected chairman of the Palestinian Authority has come to that terms, come to that realization, I think that's a good starting point, right? So we can only deal with the available outcomes that we can. So a one-state solution is never going to happen. Obviously, when you're dealing with, you're dealing with a country that was set up basically out of the ashes of the Holocaust. And if you look throughout history, go back a couple thousand years, I think you would agree that there's pretty good reason for the fact that, we're not going to go anywhere now that we have our own state, and it is a necessity. And survival of the fittest, you mentioned all these philosophers, there is nothing new about that. So all I'm saying is this, before you want to come in here and preach, listen, I agree, there's a lot of criticism to be laid, and there's some merit in what you said. But let's just be honest, right? There's a lot of other countries that are considered colonial empires and so forth that have a lot of shit to clean up in their own backyard before they start passing judgment on other countries. Everyone likes to deflect. Let's just be international, let's just be intellectually honest.
Okay. May I respond?
I'll let Patrick respond, Halisi, and then because I know your point's slightly different, and then we'll go to you.
Okay. So Ben says there shouldn't be a time limit on reparations. Well, I would like reparations for my forefathers' Irish servitude. Okay, and all the Irish.
Go fight for them. Go fight for them.
Right. I won't, because it's ridiculous. Because I believe, and like many normal people believe, life is about what's happening now and moving ahead, and they need.
So why does Israel have to right the wrongs of the past?
You shouted at me because I interrupted you. I let you talk for 5 minutes, and now you're cutting me off.
How Israeli I interrupt? I apologize.
You don't have any respect for me, so you can just interrupt me if you want. Yeah. Fine. Okay, so the problem with reparations isn't a question of whether there's enough money. That's a very superficial way of looking at it. The problem is the division it will sow when you start handing, 5 million to the one person, and the person next to them that's living in the same conditions gets nothing. That's why it's obviously not going to work. But it's a nice thing. It's a nice carrot to wave in front of minorities in America, which the Democrats are masterful at, in order to sort of buy votes or keep people on side for the next election. And I would be surprised if there ever are reparations, because you can have a Zionist, pure Jewish state. Okay, so would you say that that's a good policy for all countries to have pure ethno-nationalist states? In the West, the reason we live in the West, the reason you live in the West and others, is because we don't have pure ethno-nationalist states, because we are inclusive, because we invite and we welcome people from all different faiths. But Israel has a different set of rules, and Israel was founded before the Holocaust. It was built after the Holocaust, as you said, but it was founded, and the Balfour Declaration preceded the Holocaust by many decades. So the foundation, the design of Israel happened long before the Holocaust. So it's not strictly a reaction to the Holocaust, although the emotive cloud surrounding the discourse of Israel is certainly shaped by the very powerful emotive narrative of the Holocaust, but that's another discussion. So, let's be clear on that.
Right, I want
Suleiman,
to go to Raphael.
can I chip in?
Been waiting. Yeah, I'm literally going to come to you, Raphael. Go for it.
What about me? Are you coming back to me afterwards?
I'm going to go to Raphael, then Khaleesi, and then I'll come to you.
I'll be quick because I know some people here took too much time, I guess, speaking. I guess it comes from their emotions and stuff. That's okay. But anyway, a couple of things. Gaza. A lot of trucks with goods come to Gaza I don't know, maybe they changed the days, but I remember being there. It was every Monday and Wednesday. Trucks, like lines of trucks with goods, with cement and building materials and construction materials, food, clothes, fabric, whatever you want, just name it. Go through the Kerem Shalom point there between Gaza and Israel, and just like it's not like once a month. I'm talking about every week. Tons of trucks go there. I don't know what's going on there right now. I haven't been there for like over 10 years. But from what I remember during my service, that was amazing to see the lines of trucks there. Okay, so one, they get a lot of supply. Two, now they use, I mean, over the years since Hamas took that position of the Gaza Strip, and they were slaughtering the bodies of Fatah there. Israel saw that, okay, there's a little bit of a chaos in Gaza, therefore we cannot like do some stuff when it comes to send some goods because of some terror attacks in the Karni border line, and also in other points there between Gaza and Israel. You can look it up how many terror attacks were on those checkpoints or borderlines. And like someone said here, a lot of money is spilled into the Gaza Authority, especially in Hamas. They use this money. It's a corrupt government that take the money to themselves. They use it like almost like a damn commies. Only the ones that are close to the plate, they enjoy the money there. If you are very close to the powerful man, you'll have a good life. But then you have millions of people there that basically are in the bottom of the barrel. They barely live there, not because of the Israel, because of their quote unquote democratic elected government, the Hamas government, terror organization that use their people, yes, as a human shield, as a garbage human being. That's what they see them. They don't care about the Gazan people. They don't care about their life. They don't care about their education. They don't care about their successful life in economy. They want them to suffer. That's what I said yesterday also about Iran, which support that idea. So you have Hamas in Gaza. Then you have the West Bank, which for now get the backbone and support. Fatah get the support from also Israel, yes, and also the other countries in the West. And then, when you talk about two-state solution, it's a little problem. Why? Because one, you have the Palestinian in the West Bank, and then you have the Palestinian in Gaza. The atmosphere or the environment there is totally different. Yes, there are Palestinians, but again, they are different. You have the new generation, which is very modernized, okay? Mainly in the West Bank area. You have bars, you have pubs, you have even like a underground bars, okay, where they sell even alcohol, and a lot of the young people there, they're actually scared to do so because they don't want to be found out that they drink alcohol there underground. Yes, they have some bars there. If you didn't know, and if you go to the West Bank and if you talk to the right people during the night, you can go out and see that they go to a certain location to have some parties. Which you don't have in Gaza. Okay, Gaza is mainly ruled by militants, by terror organizations, and they are everywhere, in a hospital, in schools, in a gas station, whatever it is, in restaurants. Okay, they're all there. Another thing for Patrick, it's amazing to see people who live in the United States. And yes, I live in the United States, all right? Washington, D.C. means nothing to me, all right? It means nothing. Okay, for Jews, Jerusalem, it means something. All right? It means something. I don't care to be in Paris. Paris means nothing to me as well. London means nothing to me. I mean, I can live there, yeah. Sure, I can enjoy the life there. All right? But I have no connection to me, okay? I mean, yes, I'm American, and I'll salute the flag, and I pay my taxes, and I support the troops, and enjoy the life here. But afterward, my connection is Jerusalem. My roots are in Jerusalem. The Jews are always praying for the next year in Jerusalem, okay? That's what they're praying. That's what they're saying. Doesn't have to be right now, but they are wishing to have the complete Jerusalem, the city of peace. Okay, Yerushalayim. Shalem means like the complete. That everyone will go there eventually, not just the Jews. Once the Jerusalem is complete and the state of Israel is complete, that the Messiah comes, that's the idea, peace will come to earth. Until then, yes, there will be a lot of suffrage. There will be a lot of wars. There will be of death. And unfortunately, that's life. That's what it is. I mean, that's what hope says. And it is true. You know, people lose and people win. There were conquerors, and there were the people who lost their land all over the world. The United States, England was the British. You know, they're the most, probably the highest conquer kingdom in history. All right, that's why we speak English all around the world, you know, because they influence. So don't come and say like Israel is right now. Who are you? I mean, seriously, who are you? I mean, yeah, you can say your whatever you want, your opinions, but you know, it's like look at yourself. Put the mirror in front of yourself too. Okay, look what land you're walking on right now. All right. So your parents, yeah, came from Ireland, and yes, the Irish people and the Italian people were treated like very badly here in the United States, very badly. All right, and you're descendant.
Raphael, and I mean, finish your point, just 30 seconds.
Yes.
And then,
So, you know, just put a mirror in front of yourself. I mean, I feel a lot for the Palestinian people, and I wish to have, you know, a wonderful life. But I know, like, be realistic. That's not going to happen. Two-state solution is probably right now will be the status quo when they'll try to drag it more and more. You had many deals that came in front of the Palestinian Authority. Like the best deal was between when Prime Minister Barak took office, and also Olmert when he took office. Those deals were in front of the Palestinians, and they rejected it over and over again. So what do you want here? Like, so what people want? Just say some words.
Yeah, Raphael. So you gave them what many people believe is a lousy deal, obviously, and you're saying, well, you rejected a quarter of a plate of food.
95% of the West Bank was given to the Palestinians in the West. 95%. Don't say like a garbage deal. 95%.
This has been debated and argued to its minutia by people of greater abilities than us. And you said to me, who am I? Look in the mirror. Who am I? You're telling me who are you, Raphael? To say that to me.
I'm an Israeli. Okay? I was born in Israel. My parents were born in Israel.
I shouldn't be able to have an insight or opinion on the human condition.
No, I actually said that you can say it. I actually said that you can have your opinion.
Yeah, it didn't. It came across very disrespectful.
I mean, just to put in there, like Patrick is one of the few journalists that I respect significantly. He's someone who's speaking truth to power on a significant number of issues, and somebody whose take I respect probably more than most people on most mediums. Someone who was censored and banned from many platforms for speaking the truth on various issues. So he has significant credentials on that regard. So let's move on to Khaleesi. You wanted to make a comment?
But
I just want to jump in. Sorry, let me just jump in because Raphael spoke for a while, but I understand, Raphael, you're probably feeling emotional as well. So just I wanted to firstly address Benjamin's point. Benjamin, I looked up that resolution and let me just read it to you. It's 37/43, and I will post all of the resolutions, in fact, in the nest. You're right. It doesn't say that they can target civilians. However, it doesn't also say that they can target the military. What it says is the resolution reaffirmed the legitimacy of the struggle, and it's a very short paragraph, so I'm going to read just this one, but you can read the rest of all the resolutions. The resolution reaffirmed the legitimacy of the struggles of the people for independence, territorial integrity, national unity, and liberation from domination and occupation by all available means, including armed struggle. So that's what it says. Had it have said that it's only for military, had it have said that, then my response to you would have been, Benjamin, that given that everybody in Israel has to do a few years in the military, all civilians there are military anyway, especially given this occupation. But I just want to add a couple of quick points because we were talking about Gaza. And for Gaza, it's... You know, the thing is, there's a lot of whataboutism on this when we mention Gaza. So one of the things that, Raphael, you just said that, you know, every week trucks come with all these wonderful goods and you know that they come there every week. But then in the same breath, you said, but I haven't been there for 10 years. So I don't know how you can confirm that. And you probably not come across an organization called Gisha, It's actually an Israeli organization based in Israel, and it writes about this, and it actually says that no, there are no, I mean, why doesn't Gaza rebuild? Because I know refuge trucks aren't even allowed in Gaza to take their trash from one place to the other. They use donkeys. And this is fact on the ground, and anybody who's from Gaza can tell you that. So when we talk about Gaza, we have to mention things like, the electricity and water is controlled by Israel. I mean, how can you cage people up and then control their electricity and the water? And when people here say about, the United States, well, the United States has a constitution and it has one set of laws for everybody. It doesn't have two sets of laws. It doesn't treat other significant people as lesser human beings than other, for example, white Americans. What you sit here and say, but when they do, they're not arrested. I think we can't just, make these bold, random statements and say this is the way it is. Life in Gaza is really difficult, really, really difficult for people. The border crossings, I think it's something like 70% of Gazan population relies on humanitarian aid because they don't even meet Israel's stringent criteria. And I say stringent for travel permits. So they can't even leave the strip. There's no employment, there's no education, they can't visit or reunite with family. I mean, this is barbaric. So when we talk about these things, we have to be factual and we can't say, oh, but look, it's Hamas. Every time I hear, I'm sorry, but I'm going to say this, I'm going to generalize here, an Israeli person, and you talk about the human rights in Gaza, they won't talk about the electricity, they won't talk about the water being poisoned, they won't talk about these humanitarian conditions and the fact that they've caged up human beings. It's always going to be Hamas. And when you kind of get past that, it's going to be Hezbollah. We get past that, it's going to be Iran. It's just going to be anything but the actual issue at hand. And that's all I want to say. I'm less emotional than Raphael, so I'm going to pause there.
So can I chip in?
Yeah, of course you can, Raphael. Go for it.
All right, thank you. So first of all, Israel gives water and electricity to Gaza thanks to the taxpayer Israelis. Okay, so that's based off the Israeli taxpayer money. Which again, I don't want that to happen. I wish Gaza had their own water facility and their own electricity facility. And you know what? I wish
tell your government to give it to them. If you want it that badly, Raphael, tell your government to give it to them.
We talk about not interrupting for a while. We talk about yesterday, right? So I'll finish it quickly.
Yeah, but we have a different definition of quickly as well.
But come on now, listen. We had the Gaza people had a lawful opportunity to fix their situation, okay? Fix their situation after even Israel withdrew from Gaza, okay? Now, from some of those places there, when the settlements, you call them settlements in Gaza, those areas are like training bases for Hamas too, okay? So now, I mean, if Israel wanted to demolish that area when they trained there, so they just couldn't send like some rockets there and just bomb the entire thing. But they didn't. Okay, so even the Israelis, which I see it as a problem, they let Hamas to do their trainings there. Okay, and they're nice, even a little bit funny videos that they spread around that they show that they're very powerful. But other than that, I'm sorry again. It's a little bit very simple to put it down that the Gazan people are suffering, but you forget that they're suffering because of their let's say elected government that rules them. All right, Hamas ruining their lives, not Israel. Hamas ruining their lives.
So just two sentences here, really quickly. Okay, maybe if you took the cage away and gave them equal rights, the same rights that the Israeli citizens have, they wouldn't have elected a Hamas in the first place. And when you talk about human rights and Hamas and Gaza, remember in the West Bank, Palestinians' homes are demolished and they're given to Jewish settlers. They don't have Hamas. So what's the excuse for that?
Now, some of the houses in the West Bank are paid for. And some of the Arabs who got the money from Jews that paid for their houses.
Let's not be selective about this, Raphael. I made a point. Answer it.
Why you are interrupting? I did not interrupt you while you talk, and you keep interrupting. It's okay. Chill out. Come on, calm down.
I'm chill, but you're
no. You're
missing the point I made.
May I please intervene? Because I've been waiting for a very, very, very long time now.
So. Some of the
Raphael's emotional. Let him speak. He's emotional.
I'm emotional. You're the one who interrupt like a parrot.
Guys, let Raphael make the point.
let Raphael make the point. I'm going to go to Eunice. Eunice has been trying to get in here for a while. Go ahead, Raphael.
Yes. So some of the houses in the West Bank are paid for from Jews who bought those houses, and those Palestinians who are basically feel under threat from other Palestinians because they know that they sold their houses. So they're under target, and it's very documented. So you should definitely see it how it is treated like. Okay, I'll finish here.
Eunice, go ahead. Go ahead, Eunice.
Okay, I don't hear Raphael, but I hear the others. So I'm gonna make a point here about what's happening on Gaza. There's a very simplistic equation that is occurring in the occupied territories. The more you oppress people, the more they become aggressive. That's a basic fact, right? That's why the Palestinians are like the Palestinian citizens of Israel are not blowing buses or like doing shooting attacks and doing lion's den groups within Israel. And that's why they are less aggressive than the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, and then Palestinians in the West Bank, and less aggressive than Gazans, and less aggressive than people in southern Lebanon and Syria. So the more you oppress people, the more you see aggressiveness. I've been in Gaza once as a medical visit because of my background, and in the West Bank, you could just interact with settlers on with car traffic incidents, or looking at soldiers eating chips on the checkpoint or Mahsoumin. You see internationals going in and outside of the West Bank. Anyone who wants to visit Israel are able to visit the West Bank if they are in the country. And there's a lot of interaction. Despite there is an occupation, there's a lot of a very horrific occupation going on. That's in the West Bank. If you go to Gaza, and I was very shocked when what is those lightnings on the sea coast or horizon? He said, "Oh no, there's military naval boats trying to prevent any fishermen from leaving Gaza." If you go to, if you then want to go to the borders, you see military Mikavad tanks. There's no interactions with the Gazans that they have with Israelis. Israelis have been not encapsulating; it's an open prison that has been for a lot of years. There is a rhetoric the Israelis use. And I want to quote this. I know if a lot of you guys have heard about the MA agreement. It was a memorandum of freedom of movement. That's when the unilateral disengagement is a very important term, because no one of you, when you say Israeli withdrawal, it's not an inaccurate term, because the plan wasn't withdrawal. They never said that. In the Knesset, when they were sitting and presenting the bill, there was nothing called withdrawal. It was something called redeployment of forces from within Gaza to the borders of Gaza. That's what the term disengagement means. So at the MMA agreement of 2005, it stated that the Philadelphia route back between Rafah, because they say, we don't occupy Gaza, we left them. They can do it with Egypt. They don't do. They're not aware of the MA agreement that states that any Palestinians who wants to leave from Gaza, wants to enter Gaza, let's say he's not a resident of Gaza ID, he has to get approval from the Israeli military. I dare, and I actually challenge everyone who can say otherwise. They have to be approved. A lot of you can speak to any Gazan and tell him, when you go to the Rafah crossing, as the Israelis say, what are they doing? They're first being summoned by the Egyptian intelligence, then their names going to the Israeli intelligence, and then they see whether he's a member of Hamas or Palestinian Islamic Jihad, and there's a term she bit me. This is the same Israeli rhetoric that is going on in the occupied territories. They have been occupying millions of people. And let me tell you about my mother's side. It comes from the village of Na'lin, and this is very known to be a popular resistant village, which is adjacent to the biggest settlement in the West Bank, Modain Elite. My mother's family wanted to dig a water well in Na'lin. And that was in 2003. And she submitted the proposal. The military commander refused because we live in Area C, so there's no Palestinian Authority for people who wants to dig the Palestinian Authority issue up. She was refused. If I went to Modain Elite is just like a stone throwing from my house. I could just look at the Modain Elite settlement and say hi proposal or like a scheme, and in 6 days you'll get it. Or there have been house construction from the village that I come that has been denied because it's very close to the separation wall that was built not within the green line which separates Israel from the West Bank. No, on the villages and on the lands of.
Can Eunice, can you just wrap your point up in 30 seconds, please?
Yeah, okay. So I will end with this. What Benjamin said was very enlightening for me. We should not speak about what happened, but what we can do to make the situation calmer. Yeah, the Palestinian. This is very, very, very important because I don't think no one had mentioned this. President Abbas, the Palestinian Authority chairman. By the way, he doesn't speak Hebrew, so the one who said that he said the whole thing in Hebrew. No, he didn't say that. But he said, "I want just peace. Let's go to the UN." And that's what the UN Palestinian diplomats, and I have a lot of meetings with Palestinian diplomats and officials who go to the UN Security Council, and when they like have dialogues with the US officials and the rest of the European officials, they say, "What can we do?" Well, there's international agreements that Israel has to abide upon. For example, freezing the settlements. Why? This is a question, and I challenge any Israeli to tell me, why are they building settlements? Everyone says Israelis, Palestinians, that the settlements are a hurdle for peace. They are, especially the E1 clan in East Jerusalem. It's fragmenting the Palestinian towns. And I will end with this. 2 weeks ago, the Israeli military commander,
Sorry, Eunice, I just missed your point there. Are you trying to say that? What's your point there about the settlements? That
the settlements are hurdle for peace. Like the Israelis, and this was the only condition that Abbas said. You know what? He said you can do it. You can house the militias. You can imprison people. You can kill people. Just not do the settlements thing for freeze for a while, because you're making this very obstructive for the peace negotiations, because you're like me and you, Sulaiman, sharing a pizza, and you're eating from the pizza and saying, okay, I will give you this one while we're negotiating, and at the end you have eaten up the entire pizza. That's what's happening in the West Bank. 2 weeks ago, and I will end with this, in the town of Safa, West Ramallah, Yehuda Fox, the military commander, and I have some very close friends from Safa and families there, and they own a lot of lands and dunams in that village. He wrote, as my capacity as the military commander of the West Bank, I hereby confiscate these lands for military purposes. This is private-owned lands. It's not like Israel just find the empty land, private-owned lands by the Tabu al-Uthmani, which is the Uthmanic owned property for hundreds of years. And he said, we'll take it for military purposes, and then we'll turn it out to a settlement, exactly like they did in Ivatar settlement, Ivatar outpost in Beta, South Annapolis.
Okay, that's interesting. Aaron, thank you for that, Eunice. Aaron, I'd love to hear your thoughts and any response you have on the point you made about the settlement.
Yeah, wow. So first and foremost, I am not a speaker. I am a dad. I am someone who lives in Israel. I've listened to this conversation for 2 or 3 days, and I've sort of been sitting on my hands, not wanting to speak or share any sort of spotlight. But there's certain things that I'm hearing on the conversation that are simply so far from false that I just felt the need to come on and speak some sense for someone that lives here, experiences a lot of what goes on. And I lived in the UK for 20 years of my life and experienced also viewing the media through the lens of how Israel's presented and what Israel's doing. And it never made sense to me because I was always in love with this country, and I still am. Just to answer 2 or 3 things and to keep things broad, because I don't want to focus on specific topics because you could talk for days on any one of them. When it comes to peace and everyone's talking about, well, how can you make peace? And the most important context to have is that the Jews throughout Jewish history have been hated. There's faced genocides from the Egyptians, the Romans, the Babylonians, the Greeks, you name it, all the way through to the Holocaust and here today. So we're used to being hated and having tons of war against us. The truth and the fact of the matter is to make peace, you have to be sitting at a peace table. And it doesn't matter how many times there's been peace agreements or peace talks or 2-state solutions and all the rest of it. We can sit here and all say, we'd love this solution, we'd love that solution. There has to be an elected Palestinian government elected by the people to say, we want to sit at a table and make an agreement on behalf of the people. And that's generally, through all of my friends, family, left, right, center, that's the consensus understanding from just the general Israeli viewpoint. Now, when are they going to have elections and bring someone who can stand up and say, okay, I now represent the new voice, the new generation, this current era of Palestinian people, and we want to sit at the peace table. Until that happens, everyone else's perspective, viewpoints, ideas, it's rather irrelevant. So if some people here, just like Muhammad, who it's actually a pleasure to hear you speak, to hear some sort of context from inside of Gaza, from someone who comes from there. It's a pleasure to hear. Believe me, I'm no hate, no nothing. I don't hate Palestinians. That's not something that Israelis do. But yes, there's obviously problems that need to be fixed. But for someone like you, who's got a passionate voice, you're here speaking in front of thousands of people. You need to be that voice. You need to be that person that can run up. Can you run for an election in Gaza? Can you take power to have a voice and speak to change? No. And I think that's where you need to say. A lot of people are saying, and this is the second point, Israel's this, it's an apartheid. Palestinians aren't in Israel. You're not Israeli. There's Israel and there's Palestine. There's lots of Arab Israelis. Now, there's probably 20% of the Israeli population is Arab. There's mosques on Tel Aviv beach. In fact, where the terrorist attack was tonight, where an Italian woman tourist was killed, 3 British tourists are in the hospital right now, that was in front of a mosque on Tel Aviv beach. That you can hear the mosque going off every single day when you're sitting on the beach. There's another mosque in Jaffa on the beach, and I sit there all the time, and I hear the mosque going off. Arab culture is very, very normal in Israel. No one's bothered by it. People love Muslims. I've got Arab friends. I've got Druze friends, Palestinian friends. I personally raised money and invested in a Palestinian startup in Ramallah. Like, there's nothing between Jews, Israeli. This is all very, very high-spoken stuff because someone read an article on Daily Mail and they saw a video of Israelis doing this. At the end of the day, if you want to make peace, have peaceful conversations, don't disrespect one another, and understand that everyone's got their own viewpoints on the country. But if you really want to make change, then ask, when do the Palestinians get a voice? I'm hearing the voice currently, and I say this with all respect to everyone on this phone call, a lot of people dominating this phone call, speaking like they're the voice of the Palestinian people from a different country, never having had a passport, never lived here, never had experience here. And I get that you've seen a lot of things, learned a lot of things, and gained so much context behind it. But who's going to be the Palestinian person that's going to run and try and do something politically and try and, because that's, I think, where the existing viewpoint or the problem is. And last but not least, it's really just addressing the side of terrorism. And a lot of people are talking about, where all this hate comes from. And one of the most important quotes that I remember from an Israeli prime minister was actually from a prime minister called Golda Meir. And she said, peace will come when the Arabs love their children as much as they don't hate us. Or I'm probably quoting that wrong. That as much as they love their children, more than they hate us. And the idea is that when we see a terrorist attack happen, we see that the mothers are celebrating. They're handing out sweets and cakes in the street. Kids are celebrating it. When you celebrate death, when you celebrate terrorism, the death of Jews, and you glorify it, the next generation are going to hate the Jews just as much. And that's a problem that everyone cares to ignore. And they'll say, well, Israel's doing this, and Israel's doing this, and Israel's bombing children. It doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, if you're asking, well, how do we fix this? That's something that needs to be pointed at. And in any culture, in any corner of the world, it doesn't make sense. Mothers shouldn't be celebrating their kids dying by trying to kill Jewish kids. And to say it doesn't happen, it does happen. It happened tonight. I believe it happened last week. And in one case where someone says terrorist tunnels weren't built, I want to address one specific thing because I sent the link in the story. One terrorist tunnel, and there's been many of them, were built into kibbutzim, which is where young families lived, and I lived in one when I first moved here. The Fogel family, a very famous story, Hamas built a tunnel into a kibbutz, got into this house and basically killed a family of 5, killing 4 children and a husband and wife, murdered them at the dinner table, and then crawled back into Gaza. So these things do have dangerous purposes. There's much more stories that can be told, but essentially to go into all the itty-bitties, it seems a bit irrelevant. If you're trying to create peace, try and speak up and create a voice for the Palestinian people and find people that can actually create change there, rather than just create an echo chamber of blaming the other side. It doesn't fix anything.
I wanted to go, Mohammed, I'll come to you in a bit. I just want to go to, because I know he hasn't got much time. Ronnie, I just read your profile. You say you're waiting trial for something related to this issue. So please, go ahead, speak.
Hi, everyone. So with absolute zero respect to the previous white supremacist stooge, I just want to tell Aaron that we should
If you want to make a point, that's fine, but we're not going to start a name calling war here. Go ahead, you were muted.
You just need to unmute, Ronnie.
Okay.
Ronnie, you need to unmute your mic.
It's the bottom left.
Yeah. Was I muted? Oh.
Yes.
Hello.
So we don't do name calling on.
Actually, I added to the space, I shared to the space a table that I made comparing between Zionist propaganda and reality. And the person speaking before me went through all the points of propaganda one by one. So, you know, if you just want to challenge every single thing that he said, just look at that table and you'll figure out what actually is the reality in the Zionist race state. Now, I really don't have much time, and thank you for having me. I'll just say a few words, if I may. First of all, I heard discussion about the harsh, brutal, and barbaric military occupation of the West Bank and Gaza, but even that is not the main issue. The main issue is that the Zionist race state is, as the name suggests, it is a race state. It is built from the ground up on the basis of racial supremacy, on the basis of ethnic cleansing, on the basis of the notion that it's not only a settler colonialist project that's about usurping the land and taking over the resources and so on. It is also primarily about establishing a state for one and only one type of people at the expense of all the others, especially if they are the indigenous people to that land. So Aaron and myself are among the privileged group. By law, we are regarded as privileged Israeli Jews because we have Israeli citizenship, but our nationality is not Israeli. Our nationality is Jewish, quote unquote, in the law. Other fellow citizens who are also Israeli citizens, but are not among the privileged group, they have another nationality. In most countries, nationality and citizenship is the same, not so in the race state, because it is all about this type of distinction. And there is a whole slew of laws and regulations that are all geared towards lending privileges to people of my ethnic background and Aaron's at the expense. State is all about making sure that those 7 million control the lives of all 21 million, and as many of them, of the other 14 million, should be outside of that land if possible.
Ronnie, I've got a question for you. So I understand your point about the Palestinians being exiled, but are you saying that even within Israel, where you have people, Jewish Israelis and Arab Israelis, there's two different forms of nationality?
No,
a primary and a secondary version.
No. You're confusing between what you and I would regard as, what normal people would regard as who's Arab, who's Jewish, etc., and what the way the Zionist state defines things. So among Israeli citizens, you see Israel recognizes over 130 different nationalities other than one. So it would recognize British, it would recognize French, it would recognize pretty much most nationalities around the world, other than one. It's not Palestinian. They wouldn't recognize Israeli nationality, because acknowledging the existence of an Israeli nationality would allow for some basis of equality among its own citizens. And the whole point of that state is to deny that type of equality and to make sure that one and only one group has the important rights, what are called national rights. So among Israeli citizens, you have at least 4 different categories. There's the privileged group that I belong to, which have nationality equals Jewish, regardless of religion. There's also a category of religion. So I could have nationality equals Jewish, religion, no religion, for example. There's all kinds of quirky things like that. And other than that, there's also at least other 3 types of nationalities for Israeli citizens. There's Druze and Arab and Circassian, which is another minority.
Okay? I'd love to respond
so you
before
have...
I go to bed, but I'm going to let you continue.
Yeah, of course. I'll come to you, Aaron. Ashraf. Just one other question, Ronnie. It says on your profile you're an Israeli dissident. So what
I transitioned from Zionism into humanism, because I oppose everything that the Zionist race state stands for. Just like I would oppose any state that is based on racial supremacy. It is based on the exact same principles of the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan. Only that it has much better PR, like the former speaker. I mean, okay, but other than that, it should have exactly the same type of legitimacy as a state that is founded by the KKK. But you see, the KKK was, even though it was quite mainstream at the time, and they were marching down DC, etc., in the famous pictures. Still, it has been outlawed, or at least it's not mainstream anymore, other than Trump's father, who was with the KKK. Okay, but it's no longer mainstream, and it's not okay. There is a constitution and so on. So there is something that is aimed to safeguard equal rights for everyone. In the Zionist state, it's the exact opposite. It is a state that is built on that same notion of the Ku Klux Klan, and the entire system, the entire legal system, the courts, the you name it, the government, the parliament, every single thing about that state is geared towards maintaining that KKK-like ideology and practice.
Aaron, I'm just going to go to Aaron.
So first of all, as I said at the beginning, I'm not a speaker. I don't speak on these things. I'm not a political analyst. I'm a dad. I work for myself. So first and foremost, I'm not a Zionist propaganda. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here because I feel passionately about loving this country, living here, a good life, trying to help people. I've got Arab and Palestinian friends, and for me, I'm just trying to calm the conversation down, bring context to it, and just tell people to look inwards and try not to try and find the solution between a Twitter thing, but really look to try and understand the other side. And I respected having Mohammed on the call, being able to understand his side, because it's the first time I've ever been able to do so. So second of all, I'm not white. And I think it's very, very rude of you to just start attacking me and assuming I'm a this, that, and the other. I'm not white. I'm Jewish. My mom was Jewish. My dad was Jewish. My grandparents were Jewish. I lived my entire life Jewish history, and my religion is Jewish. My gene pool is Jewish. My kid is Jewish. So I identify as Jewish. That's the exact reason why I'm in this country. So that's the second thing. It doesn't need to be an argument. It doesn't need to be a debate. But you shouldn't just assume people's identity by looking at their picture. But aside from all that, a lot of what you I Googled it because I knew it was nonsense, because the number of applications of people living in the Arab territories trying to live in the Israeli territory increases over 100% every single year on year. The Arab population in Israel is 20%. Last year, in the coalition government, there was an Arab political party that received over 200,000 votes from Arabs that were able to vote. So when people are saying, well, why do Arabs not get equal rights? Well, they do when they live in Israel. So if the Palestinian people don't give them, fine, they're not able to vote in Palestine. I don't want to bring that up and start a whole debate. But the idea is, in Israel, every single Arab gets the exact same rights as an Israeli, to the point that one of the judges on the Supreme Court is an Arab. The head of the Israeli police was an Arab. The head of the medical facilities of the whole of Hadassah Hospital is an Arab. To say that they don't get rights is just an utter spit in the face of every single Arab who's worked their ass off in this country to get themselves into a position of power, into a position of respect, or a position where they're able to help people. To just completely diminish that just to make a point like there's some sort of apartheid is nonsense. And the last thing is, you randomly threw in the word ethnic cleansing, which is just nonsense. Ethnic cleansing results in a decrease of population. The Arab population in Israel and the Palestinians increases year on year on year on year. There are now 8 million people. There were 2 million people back in the 70s. Terms like that just to make a point when it doesn't exist. There is no ethnic cleansing. We're not lining people up, putting them in gas chambers. And as a Jew who no longer lives here because he gave up and he's exiled himself, who's over there to start throwing around ethnic cleansing is utterly ridiculous. And that's
if I may,
it's ridiculous.
The absolute lie that Fred Trump was in the KKK, which is provably incorrect and has been fact
Well,
checked.
KKK was created by the Democrat Party, but it doesn't make a difference. Again, it's not.
Anyway, that's not. It's not really a relevant point.
It's silly stuff.
Every single statement by Aaron is false, and Trump's father wasn't.
Google any single one of the points that I made. You'll see every single one.
Right, Ronnie.
May I respond?
One second, guys. Sorry, this is the first time people start talking over each other. First time I've had to mute all day today. Right, I want Ronnie to respond. Forget the Trump point because they're not relevant, but the other points he made, if you can respond to them, that'd be brilliant. Ronnie, go ahead.
Sure. Yeah, I was just muted. Okay, briefly. First of all, where do we even start? You have to remind me what was said. Oh, yes. Okay, there's no ethnic cleansing. Okay, ethnic cleansing, among historians, there is no discussion, there is no debate whether there was an ethnic cleansing. The only discussion among historians is whether this was a premeditated ethnic cleansing or whether this was a result of the so-called war of 1948. Just not long ago, 10th of March, we marked 75 years to Plan Dalet of the Haganah. The Haganah is one of the three paramilitary groups that was terrorist groups that were, founded the state of Israel. And basically, the Plan Dalet of the Haganah describes in detail how the villages and towns will be ethnically cleansed, how they will be surrounded and ethnically cleansed, and this was all planned and signed by the Haganah. Okay, this was, and by the way, 1/3 of the people that were ethnically cleansed in 1948 were already expelled from their land before the foundation of the Zionist state in 15th of May, 48. Okay, the very first villages were Caesarea, and a few others. There were 6 villages where the Zionists did kind of a trial run for their ethnic cleansing project or practice. They saw that it was doable. It was quite easy actually, and they went forward with that. That's about the ethnic cleansing. It's undebatable. So I mean, challenging that is kind of really absurd to a whole other level. And it has nothing to do with whether the population grows or not. There is the forced ethnic cleansing. People who have been expelled from their land, they have every right to return home. You have at the moment, like I mentioned before, half of all Palestinians are refugees in forced exile. Many of them are just across the border in Syria, Lebanon, Jordan. These are the majority of Palestinians. And then you have a couple more million or so who are IDPs, internally displaced people who are citizens of the Zionist state, what Aaron calls Israeli Arabs. Israeli Arab is a really demeaning term.
That's how they
so they are Palestinians, and the ones who are more politically aware, they would refer to themselves as 48ers. They are citizens or they are living in Palestine 48. You see, there's Palestine that was occupied in 1948, and then the rest of it was occupied in 67. So the lingo is there's 48, which is what would call Israel, and 67, which are the West Bank and Gaza. So basically, when of thought, but talking about yes, Palestinians inside 48, they are far from being equal citizens. By law, they are discriminated against in every possible way. If you go to Adallah's website, you will find adallah.org, I think. You will find the whole list, more than 50 discriminatory laws, which are all based on that very distinction that we talked about before, about nationality, whether one's nationality is quote there are 3 laws in the legal system in the Israeli law book that explicitly have the term Jewish in them. The very first one is the law of return. There's 2 others, and all these other 50 discriminatory laws are based on that. So in the other laws, they are not explicitly, but rather implicitly discriminatory and racist, because they say if one is eligible under the law of return, they are also eligible to this and that. So, and this is how they can get away with being blatantly racist, because they say, well, if someone is eligible according to this, then they're also. And I'll just say one more thing, if I may. The discrimination, or the it's far more than just discrimination. We're talking about a race state. We're talking about a whole system of racial supremacy. And I have to clarify what white supremacy means. But from the very first day of a baby's life, they are being split, basically. What's the word in English? Anyway, like you have two paths that they walk, depending on whether the baby is a child of Israeli Jewish parents, meaning among the privileged group, and they get their citizenship, their Israeli citizenship, under the law of return, even though they haven't returned anywhere, they were born there. And if they are babies to Israeli citizens who are not among the privileged